when Charlotte Bennett, a 30-year-old billionaire CEO worth over $2 billion, climbed into Ethan Cole's beat-up conversion van at 6 in the morning without telling a single person where she was going, she had exactly 17 minutes before her assistant would notice she'd vanished. The single-father mechanic who'd spent 8 months rebuilding that van in his driveway had made the invitation as a joke. She'd accepted it like a woman with nothing left to lose. 3 hours later, steam would explode from the engine on a deserted highway, and both their lives would shatter in ways neither could predict. Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey travels. The neighborhood of Riverside Terrace didn't wake up gently. It jerked to life every weekday morning around 6:15 with the synchronized chaos of garage doors grinding open, coffee makers gurgling in identical kitchens, and the particular brand of exhausted silence that came from people who'd stopped expecting their lives to surprise them. Ethan Cole had been awake since 4:30. He stood in his driveway wearing oil-stained jeans and a faded Marines t-shirt that had seen better decades, staring at the 1987 Dodge Ram van that had consumed every spare minute and most of his sanity for the past 8 months. The conversion work was finished. The engine, rebuilt twice because he'd screwed up the timing on the first attempt, finally ran smooth. The interior smelled like fresh wood stain and new upholstery instead of the mouse droppings and mildew he'd spent weeks scrubbing out. It was ready. He wasn't sure he was. Behind him, the house sat dark except for the kitchen light. His daughter Mia was still asleep. She'd be awake in 40 minutes, and Mrs. Patterson from 2 streets over would arrive to stay with her for the next 2 weeks, while Ethan did something he hadn't done since before his wife died 3 years ago. Leave. Just leave. No destination, no plan, no responsibilities except keeping the tank full and the engine running. The thought made his chest feel like someone had cracked it open. "You're actually doing this." Ethan turned. Charlotte Bennett stood on her front porch across the street, holding a ceramic coffee mug that probably cost more than his grocery budget. She wore black yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a way that made her look almost normal, instead of like someone whose face appeared in Forbes magazine and Wall Street Journal profiles. They'd been neighbors for 2 years. They'd had maybe 15 actual conversations. "Yeah," Ethan said. "I'm actually doing this." Charlotte walked down her porch steps, barefoot, he noticed, and crossed the street. Up close, she looked tired. Not the kind of tired that came from a bad night's sleep, the kind that lived deeper. "How long?" she asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3 if I don't run out of money first." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Mia's staying with a neighbor. My boss thinks I'm insane, but he's giving me the time off anyway." "Where are you going?" "Wherever the van goes." Charlotte studied the vehicle like she was analyzing a quarterly earnings report. "You rebuilt this yourself?" "Most of it. YouTube helped with the parts I didn't know." He waited for the polite comment, the careful retreat back to her mansion and her important life. Instead, she walked around the van, peering through the windows at the fold-down bed, the small camp stove, the storage cabinets he'd built from reclaimed wood. "The craftsmanship is good," she said. "Thanks." He didn't mention the 3 panic attacks he'd had during the build, or the night he'd almost set the whole thing on fire trying to install the electrical system. Charlotte circled back to face him. The early morning light hit her features in a way that made her look younger and older at the same time. "When do you leave?" "About 10 minutes. Ethan checked his watch. "Soon as I finish loading the cooler." She nodded slowly. Then she did something that would replay in his mind for years. She smiled. Not the careful, controlled smile she wore in the rare moments he'd seen her leaving for work in designer suits. This was different, crooked, almost reckless. "Take me with you." Ethan laughed. It came out nervous and too loud in the quiet street. "Yeah, okay. I'm serious," the laugh died. "You're what?" "Take me with you," Charlotte repeated. "On your trip." "You don't even know me." "I know you spent 8 months fixing a van in your driveway. I know you're a single father. I know you work 60-hour weeks at Morrison's Auto Repair." She paused. "I know you're brave enough to leave." Ethan felt like he'd stepped into someone else's morning. "Ms. Bennett." "Charlotte." "Charlotte, you're a—" He stopped, trying to figure out how to say billionaire CEO without sounding like an idiot. "You run a tech company. You have responsibilities, important things. You can't just—" Can't I? The question hung between them. A car drove past. Someone's dog barked 3 houses down. The world kept moving like this conversation wasn't completely insane. Why would you want to? Ethan asked quietly. Charlotte looked at her mansion, 5,000 square feet of modern architecture, floor-to-ceiling windows, a security system that cost more than most people's cars. Then she looked back at the van. Because I haven't wanted anything in a very long time. Something in her voice made Ethan's ribcage feel tight. I was joking, he said. I wasn't. You don't have clothes, or supplies, or give me 8 minutes. Before he could respond, Charlotte turned and walked back across the street. She didn't run, didn't rush, just moved with the quiet certainty of someone who'd already decided. Ethan stood frozen in his driveway, convinced he'd hallucinated the entire conversation. 7 minutes later, Charlotte reappeared. She'd changed into jeans, actual jeans, not the expensive kind with designer labels, a plain gray t-shirt and hiking boots that looked brand new. She carried a black duffel bag in one hand and her phone in the other. As Ethan watched, she powered the phone down and dropped it into her mailbox. What are you doing? He called. Leaving. She crossed the street again, this time with purpose. Do you have room for this? She lifted the duffel. Charlotte, you can't just... People will look for you. Your company... My assistant has instructions for the next 2 weeks. The board knows I'm taking time off. Everything that matters is handled. She met his eyes. I'm not disappearing. I'm just... going. This is crazy. Yes. You're going to regret this in about 2 hours. Probably. Charlotte opened the passenger door. Are we leaving or not? Ethan's brain screamed at him to stop this, to be the responsible adult, to explain to this woman, this incredibly wealthy, successful, important woman, that his van smelled weird, that the AC barely worked, that he was planning to sleep in Walmart parking lots and eat gas station sandwiches for 2 weeks. Instead, he heard himself say, "Back seat, the front seat's got a broken spring." Charlotte tossed her bag in the back and climbed into the passenger seat anyway. Ethan stared at her. I just told you. I heard you. She buckled her seatbelt. I've sat through $1,000 a plate fundraiser dinners that felt worse than a broken spring. He didn't know what to say to that. The front door of his house opened. Mrs. Patterson emerged, waving. Ethan waved back, his hand moving on autopilot. She gave him a thumbs up. He'd already said his goodbyes to Mia the night before. A tearful, messy conversation where his 6-year-old daughter had made him promise to bring her back a snow globe from wherever he ended up. He'd promised. Now he had a billionaire in his passenger seat. Ethan climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, it turned over on the first try, thank God, and sat there with his hands on the wheel. Last chance, he said. You can still go back to your life. Charlotte stared straight ahead through the windshield. Drive. So he did. The first hour passed in silence so complete that Ethan kept glancing over to make sure Charlotte was still real. She sat perfectly still, watching the suburbs dissolve into strip malls, then into farmland, then into the kind of empty highway that made people remember how small they were. You okay? He finally asked. I don't know yet. Honest answer. He could work with that. There's water bottles in the cooler behind your seat, snacks in the bin next to it. Bathroom breaks whenever you need them. Thank you. More silence. Ethan turned on the radio. Classic rock station, something from the 80s that his dad used to play. Charlotte didn't complain, so he left it. Around the second hour, she finally spoke again. How long since you did something like this? Like what? Left everything behind. Ethan thought about it. Never, actually. Even before Mia, before Sarah, my wife, I always had a plan. College, then the Marines, then marriage, then... He trailed off. Never just drove without knowing where I was going. Scared? Terrified. Charlotte smiled slightly. Good. Yeah? Why's that good? Because if you weren't scared, it wouldn't mean anything. He couldn't argue with that logic. They stopped for gas at a rundown station that looked like it had been forgotten by time. Ethan filled the tank while Charlotte went inside. She came back with 2 terrible-looking hot dogs, a bag of chips, and coffee that smelled like burnt rubber. Breakfast, she announced, handing him a hot dog. Ethan took it. When's the last time you ate gas station food? College? Maybe. She bit into her hot dog, made a face, and kept eating anyway. This is disgusting. Welcome to the road. They ate standing next to the van, watching a semi-truck refuel across the pump island. The driver, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and a braid, nodded at them. Ethan nodded back. People keep staring at you, Charlotte said quietly. No, they're staring at you. He gestured vaguely at her. You look like someone who shouldn't be at a place like this. What do I look like? Someone who's lost. Charlotte considered this. Accurate. They got back on the road. The highway stretched endless and gray. Billboards advertised injury lawyers, adult superstores, fireworks warehouses. The landscape flattened into fields that went on forever. Ethan had forgotten how much of the country was just empty. Tell me about your daughter, Charlotte said around the third hour. So he did. He told her about Mia's obsession with dinosaurs, how she corrected adults who called them lizards, how she'd recently decided she wanted to be a paleontologist and a princess at the same time. He told her about Sarah, carefully, because talking about his dead wife to a woman he barely knew felt like walking on glass, and how Mia had her mother's stubbornness and his terrible sense of humor. She sounds remarkable, Charlotte said. She is. Ethan paused. You don't have kids? No. Ever want them? I don't know. I never had time to want anything. She said it matter-of-factly, but something underneath the words sounded hollow. They drove. Around noon, Ethan's stomach started making noises that probably violated noise ordinances. Charlotte dug through the snack bin and emerged with granola bars that tasted like cardboard and optimism. So what do you actually do? Ethan asked. I mean, I know you run a company, but what does the company do? We develop AI-driven logistics software for supply chain management. Ethan stared at the road. I understood maybe 4 of those words. Charlotte laughed, actually laughed. We make programs that help companies move products more efficiently. Like Amazon? Amazon is a client, yes. Huh. He processed that. And you just left. They're okay with that? I have a COO who's been waiting for me to step back for 3 years. He's probably celebrating right now. She unwrapped another granola bar. The company doesn't need me as much as it needed me to need it. That sounds lonely. It was. The temperature gauge on the dashboard started climbing. Ethan noticed it peripherally, assumed it was just the afternoon heat, and kept driving. They'd covered almost 200 miles. The van was running perfectly. Everything was fine. Everything was fine. The gauge climbed higher. Ethan? Charlotte pointed at the dashboard. I see it. He turned down the radio, listening. The engine sounded normal. No weird knocking, no grinding, maybe just a sensor issue. He'd check it at the next. Steam exploded from under the hood. White, scalding steam that erupted like a geyser and completely obscured the windshield. Ethan swore, hit the hazard lights, and guided the van onto the shoulder as the engine screamed. The temperature gauge was buried in the red. Other drivers blasted past them at 70 miles per hour, their vehicles shaking the van with each pass. He killed the engine. Stay inside, he said. What's? Just stay inside. Ethan grabbed the toolbox from behind his seat and climbed out into heat that felt like standing in front of an oven. The highway shoulder was gravel and broken glass. The sun hammered down from a cloudless sky. Semi-trucks roared past close enough to feel the air displacement. He popped the hood, carefully, because releasing that catch could mean a face full of steam, and stepped back as more vapor poured out. 8 months of work. 8 months of every spare dollar, every spare minute, every piece of hope he'd scraped together. He'd rebuilt this engine himself, twice. He'd tested it, retested it. It was supposed to work. It was supposed to work. The steam cleared enough to see the problem. The upper radiator hose had split, a catastrophic failure that was dumping coolant onto the engine block where it vaporized on contact. Coolant pooled under the van, staining the gravel green. How bad? Charlotte's voice. Ethan turned. She'd gotten out despite his instructions and stood there squinting in the brutal sunlight. Bad, he said. Radiator hose is shredded. We're losing all the coolant. Can you fix it? Not here. Not without parts. He looked up and down the highway. Nothing but empty road in both directions. We need a tow. How far to the nearest town? He pulled out his phone. No service. Great. Charlotte checked her phone, then remembered she'd left it in her mailbox. Do you have a spare hose? No, I'm an idiot who didn't pack a spare hose. You're not an idiot. I'm standing on the side of a highway 3 hours from home with a broken van and a billionaire I barely know. I'm definitely an idiot. The words came out harsher than he intended. Charlotte didn't flinch. Then we wait for service or someone stops. Nobody stops anymore. Then we walk. In this heat, it's got to be 95 degrees. So we die here instead? Despite everything, Ethan almost laughed. There was something absurd about standing in the emergency lane arguing with a woman who probably had a private jet gathering dust somewhere. A truck roared past, then another, then a sedan with Texas plates. Nobody stopped. Here. Charlotte handed him a water bottle from the van. Drink. He drank. The water was warm and tasted like plastic, but it helped. I'm sorry, he said. This was supposed to be, I don't know, an escape, adventure, not breaking down 3 hours in like some kind of cruel joke. It's not a joke. Charlotte looked at the van, then at him. It's just hard. Everything worthwhile is hard. You sound like a motivational poster. I've given enough keynote speeches to sound like 100 motivational posters. That surprised a real laugh out of him. They stood there in the heat, stranded, while traffic screamed past and the sun bleached all the color out of the world. Okay, Ethan said. New plan. I'm going to try and limp the van to that exit sign I saw about a mile back. It'll probably destroy what's left of the engine, but sitting here isn't working. Will it make it a mile? Maybe, if I keep the speed low and pray a lot. You pray? Not really, but desperate times. Charlotte grabbed the water bottles. Then let's go. Ethan refilled the radiator with the emergency coolant he'd packed, 3 bottles that would buy them maybe 10 minutes of running time. He started the engine. It coughed, sputtered, and caught. The temperature gauge immediately started climbing again. Get in, he said. They pulled back onto the highway at 30 miles per hour with the hazard lights flashing. Other drivers honked, swerved around them, made gestures that were definitely illegal in several states. Ethan kept his eyes locked on the exit sign growing slowly larger in the distance. Half a mile. Quarter mile. The engine started knocking. The temperature gauge hit the red zone again. Ethan could smell burning coolant, hot metal, and his own fear sweat. Come on, he whispered. Come on, come on, come on. They made the exit ramp. The ramp led to a 2-lane road that looked like it serviced exactly one building, a combination gas station and auto repair shop that had seen better decades. Ethan coasted into the parking lot and killed the engine. Silence. We made it, Charlotte said. Barely. They climbed out. The shop looked closed despite the open sign. A bell jangled when Ethan pushed through the door into air-conditioned gloom that smelled like motor oil and old coffee. Help you? A voice from the back. A man emerged from the garage bay, 60-something, wearing coveralls with a name tag that said Frank. He looked at Ethan, then at Charlotte, then back at Ethan with an expression that suggested he'd seen stranger things, but couldn't remember when. Radiator hose blew, Ethan said. Van's outside. Any chance you've got a replacement? Frank scratched his jaw. What year? 87, Dodge Ram, 350 V8. Huh. Frank walked outside, examined the van like a doctor examining a patient, and popped the hood. He looked at the engine for a long moment. You rebuild this? Yeah. Good work. Timing's off by about a hair, but good work. The hose? Got one in stock. Miracle, really. Nobody drives these old girls anymore. Frank straightened up. 120 for the part and labor. Take about an hour. Ethan felt the number like a punch. He'd budgeted for repairs, but not this early, not this much. Can you do it for 90? 120 is already friend pricing. 95? Frank looked at Charlotte, who'd been standing quietly next to the van. She with you? Yeah. She your wife? No, we're... Ethan didn't know how to finish that sentence. Friend, Charlotte supplied. I'm a friend. Frank studied them both with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every kind of human drama play out in his parking lot. $100, cash, and you buy your next tank of gas here. Deal. Ethan shook his hand. Frank disappeared into the garage bay. Charlotte and Ethan wandered to the side of the building where a rusted metal bench offered some shade. They sat. I can pay for it, Charlotte said quietly. No. Ethan, no. He said it firmly but not unkindly. This is my trip. My van. My problem. It's my trip too now. You didn't even plan to be here 12 hours ago. Charlotte looked at her hands. Neither did you. Not really. You planned the van, the route, the logistics, but you didn't plan on actually leaving. You were terrified this morning. How do you know? Because I'm terrified right now. She said it so simply, so honestly, that Ethan felt something in his chest shift. And if I go back, that terror wins. They sat in silence while trucks rumbled past on the distant highway and Frank's radio played country music from inside the garage. Why did you really come? Ethan asked. Charlotte took a long time to answer. About 6 months ago, I woke up in my penthouse apartment and couldn't remember the last time I'd felt anything. Not happy, not sad, not angry, just nothing. I run a company worth billions. I employ 3,000 people. I get invited to speak at conferences where people pay money to hear me talk. And I feel nothing. That sounds awful. It was like being dead while still walking around. She watched a crow land on the dumpster across the parking lot. Then this morning, I saw you standing next to that van looking absolutely terrified, and I thought, I want that. I want to feel scared enough that it means I'm doing something real. Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Frank emerged an hour and 15 minutes later, wiping his hands on a rag. You're all set. New hose, topped off the coolant, checked the belts while I was in there. One of them's about 6 months from failing, but it'll get you where you're going. Thanks, Frank. Where you headed? Not sure yet. Frank nodded like that made perfect sense. Best trips are the ones without destinations. Drove to Alaska once back in '73. Didn't plan it, just went. Met my wife at a diner in Fairbanks. He looked at Charlotte again. You take care of this idiot. I'll try, Charlotte said. They paid. Ethan counted out 520s from his cash stash, filled up the tank, and got back on the road. The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that looked too perfect to be real. Ethan's hands were still shaking slightly on the wheel. The adrenaline from the breakdown was wearing off, leaving exhaustion in its place. We need to find a place to stop for the night, he said. There's a campground marked on that map in the glove box. About 40 miles north. Ethan glanced at her. You looked at the map? While Frank was working, I figured we should have some idea where we're going. Thought this trip didn't have a destination. It doesn't, but it should have a direction. The campground turned out to be a half-abandoned state park with pit toilets, a hand pump well, and sites that cost $12 on the honor system. They were the only people there. Ethan parked the van at a site overlooking a ravine filled with scrub oak and sage. He'd set up camp a dozen times in his driveway, practicing until he could do it in under 10 minutes. In reality, with sore muscles and fading light, and Charlotte trying to help but not knowing how anything worked, it took closer to 40. The camp stove wouldn't light. Did you check the fuel line? Charlotte asked. Yes, I checked the fuel line. What about the igniter? Also checked. Then why won't it? I don't know, Charlotte. Maybe the universe just hates me today. She was quiet for a moment, then, hand me the wrench. What? The wrench. The adjustable one. Ethan handed it to her. Charlotte examined the stove's fuel connection, made an adjustment he couldn't quite see in the dying light, and tried the igniter again. It lit immediately. How did you? I have a mechanical engineering degree from Stanford. I just don't use it anymore. She said it without pride or bitterness, just fact. They heated up canned soup that tasted like salt and regret, ate it with stale crackers, and watched the stars emerge one by one from the darkening sky. I forgot there were this many stars, Charlotte said. Light pollution makes you forget what the sky's supposed to look like. Everything makes you forget. She set down her empty soup can. That's the whole problem. You spend so long performing the life you're supposed to have that you forget what you actually want. What do you want? Charlotte looked at him. In the glow from the camp stove, her face seemed younger, softer, more uncertain. I'm starting to figure that out. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Another answered. The sound made Ethan's spine straighten with instinctive unease. They won't bother us, he said, trying to sound confident. I know. But Charlotte moved slightly closer to the fire anyway. They cleaned up the dinner mess, stored the food in the van's exterior compartment. Bear country, Ethan explained, though he hadn't actually checked if bears lived in this particular area, and tried to figure out sleeping arrangements. The van had one fold-down bed. I can sleep outside, Ethan offered. Don't be ridiculous. We're both adults. We can share the bed without it being weird. It was definitely going to be weird. They climbed into the van. Charlotte first, then Ethan, both of them moving with the careful awkwardness of people very aware of personal space. The bed was just wide enough for two people if neither moved much. Ethan had packed sleeping bags, but it was warm enough that they'd just lay on top of them. Silence. Ethan? Yeah? Thank you. For what? For saying yes this morning, even though you thought I was crazy. You are crazy? I know. A pause. So are you. He couldn't argue with that. Outside, the coyotes kept talking to each other in a language older than roads or destinations or broken radiator hoses. Inside the van, two people who barely knew each other lay awake in the dark, wondering what they'd started. Ethan fell asleep first, exhaustion finally winning. Charlotte stayed awake longer, staring at the van's ceiling, listening to his breathing shift into the steady rhythm of sleep. For the first time in 6 months, she felt something other than nothing. It felt like the beginning of falling. Charlotte woke to the sound of rain hammering the van's metal roof like 1,000 angry fists. For a confused moment, she didn't know where she was. The darkness was too complete, the air smelled wrong, and someone was breathing next to her. Then she remembered. The van. The highway. The choice she'd made that still felt half insane in the cold light of, she checked her watch, 4:30 in the morning. Ethan. She shook his shoulders. Ethan, wake up. He jerked awake with the startled gasp of someone pulled from deep sleep. What's wrong? It's raining. So? So we left everything outside. The camp chairs, the cooler, the bin with most of their food, all of it sitting in what sounded like a biblical downpour. Damn it. Ethan fumbled for his shoes in the dark. Okay, we need to... Thunder cracked so loud the van shook. Charlotte found her boots by feel, laced them with shaking fingers while Ethan dug through the supplies for his flashlight. The beam, when he found it, was weak and yellowish, the kind of light that made shadows worse instead of better. Ready? He asked. No. Me neither. Let's go. They opened the van's rear doors and stepped out into chaos. The rain wasn't falling. It was attacking. Cold, heavy drops that hit hard enough to sting. The campground had transformed into a network of streams, water rushing downhill toward the ravine in channels that hadn't existed 12 hours ago. Their campsite was flooding. Grab the chairs, Ethan shouted over the roar of rain and thunder. Charlotte splashed toward where they'd left the folding chairs. The ground had turned to mud that sucked at her boots with each step. She grabbed both chairs, collapsed them with fumbling hands, and slogged back toward the van. Ethan was wrestling with the cooler, trying to drag it through ankle-deep water. It's too heavy, he yelled. Empty it. What? Empty it into the van, then bring the cooler. They worked in the downpour, passing items hand to hand, water bottles, food containers, the camp stove they'd fought with the night before. Charlotte's clothes were soaked through in seconds. Her hair plastered to her skull. Rain ran down her face, into her eyes, tasting like dirt and ozone. Lightning turned the world white for a split second, and in that flash she saw Ethan's face, focused, determined, streaming with water. Thunder followed immediately. The storm was directly overhead. The tarp! Ethan pointed at the green bundle they'd staked over their picnic table. It was filling with water, sagging dangerously. We need to get it down before it tears. Charlotte ran towards it. Her boots skidded in the mud and she went down hard on one knee, pain lancing through the joint. She pushed back up, ignoring it, and reached the tarp. The stakes had loosened in the saturated ground. She pulled them free while Ethan worked the other side, both of them fighting the wind that had picked up and was trying to turn the tarp into a sail. They got it down, wadded it into a sopping bundle, and threw it into the van. "Anything else?" Charlotte shouted. Ethan swept his flashlight across the site. Water was everywhere now, running in rivers. "I think that's... Wait, the food bin." He'd left it near the fire ring, which was now an island in a growing lake. He splashed toward it, lost his footing in the current, and caught himself against a tree. Charlotte reached him, grabbed his arm. "Together!" she yelled. They retrieved the bin together, half wading through water that was somehow both freezing and blood-warm at the same time. Back at the van, they shoved everything inside in a chaotic pile of wet gear and muddy equipment. Ethan slammed the rear doors. "Get in the front!" They climbed into the cab, slamming the doors against the wind. For a moment they just sat there, breathing hard, dripping onto the seats. The rain continued its assault on the roof. Water sheeted down the windshield in waves. "You okay?" Ethan asked. "I fell. My knee." Charlotte touched it gingerly. It throbbed, but didn't feel seriously damaged. "Let me see. It's fine." "Charlotte." She rolled up her soaked jeans. Even in the weak dome light, she could see the scrape, raw and bleeding, embedded with grit. Ethan dug through the glove box, found a first aid kit that looked like it predated the van, and pulled out antiseptic wipes. "This is going to hurt," he warned. "Just do it." He cleaned the wound with surprising gentleness. Charlotte hissed through her teeth, but didn't pull away. He applied antibiotic ointment and a bandage that was probably too small but better than nothing. "Thanks," she said. "Thank you for not calling me an idiot for leaving everything outside." "Oh, you're absolutely an idiot. I'm just also an idiot for not thinking of it either." That surprised a laugh out of him. "Fair." They sat in the van while the storm raged and the sky slowly lightened from black to charcoal gray. Around 6, the rain lessened to a steady pour instead of a deluge. Ethan started the engine. It turned over on the first try, small miracle, and blasted the heat to combat the cold that had settled into their bones. "We can't stay here," he said. "The campsite's flooding. We need higher ground." "Where?" "I don't know. Somewhere not underwater." He put the van in gear and navigated out of the campground, the tires slipping and sliding through mud. The exit road had become a shallow river. Ethan drove through it slowly, water splashing up over the hood, and Charlotte held her breath until they made it to pavement. The highway was nearly empty. Smart people were staying home. They drove through the storm, the windshield wipers working overtime and barely keeping up, while thunder rolled across the hills. "This is insane," Charlotte said. "Yeah. We should find a motel." "Can't afford it." "Ethan, I budgeted for camping. Motels weren't in the plan. Plans change. We're soaked, exhausted, and everything we own is covered in mud. We'll dry out when the sun comes up." Charlotte looked at the apocalyptic sky. "That's optimistic." They drove for another hour through the storm. The heater kept them from hypothermia, but couldn't touch the deeper cold that came from wearing wet clothes. Charlotte's teeth started chattering. She clenched her jaw to stop it, but Ethan noticed. "Okay," he said. "Next town. We find a motel." "Thank you." The next town turned out to be a place called Riverside, population maybe 3,000, according to the faded sign. One main street, a handful of businesses, and 2 motels competing for the dozen travelers desperate or lost enough to stop there. Ethan pulled into the parking lot of the cheaper-looking option, Desert Rose Inn, though there wasn't a desert or rose in sight. The neon sign flickered weakly in the rain. "Wait here," he said. "I'll get us a room." "Rooms," Charlotte corrected. 2 rooms. "Can't afford 2 rooms." "I can." "Charlotte, I'm not having this argument again. I'm paying for my own room." Ethan looked like he wanted to argue more, but exhaustion won. "Fine. I'll get 2 rooms." He came back 10 minutes later looking grim. "They only have 1 vacancy. Couple checked out early because of the storm, but everything else is booked. There's some kind of wedding in town." Charlotte was too cold and tired to care. "Is it a double?" 2 queens." "Good enough." The room smelled like cigarettes and industrial cleaner, and the carpet had stains that probably violated health codes. But it had hot water, a heater that worked, and beds that weren't soaking wet. Charlotte claimed the first shower. She stood under water hot enough to hurt, watching mud and blood swirl down the drain until her fingers pruned and the shivers finally stopped. When she emerged in the spare clothes from her duffel, dry, blessed dry, Ethan was staring at the pile of wet gear they'd brought in. "It's all ruined," he said quietly. "It's wet. There's a difference. The sleeping bags are soaked. The food is probably contaminated. The tarp has a rip in it I didn't see before." He sat on the edge of the bed. "This whole trip is falling apart." Charlotte sat next to him. Outside, the rain continued. "We made it out of the flood. The van still runs. We're alive and warm. I'd call that winning." "I had this whole romantic idea in my head," Ethan said. "The open road, freedom, adventure. And instead we've had a breakdown, a flood, and we're sitting in a motel room that smells like someone died in it." "Romance is a lie sold by people who've never actually done anything difficult," Charlotte said. "Real adventures are muddy and expensive, and nothing works the way it's supposed to." "You sound like you're speaking from experience." "I built a company from nothing. You know how many times I almost quit? How many disasters I survived that should have killed the whole thing?" She pulled her wet hair into a ponytail. "Every time someone profiles me in a magazine, they make it sound smooth, inevitable, like I had some master plan, but it was chaos, barely controlled disaster from start to finish. And you kept going anyway." "Because the alternative was going back to a life where nothing mattered." She met his eyes. "Same reason I'm here." Ethan studied her face like he was seeing something for the first time. Then he stood and headed for the shower. When he emerged 20 minutes later, Charlotte had spread out their wet gear across every available surface. Sleeping bags draped over chairs, clothes hanging from the curtain rod, the tarp stretched across the second bed. The room looked like a disaster relief center, but at least things were drying. "I'm starving," Ethan announced. "There's a diner across the street. I saw it when we pulled in." They ran through the rain, still pouring, and burst into Millie's family restaurant smelling like wet dog and desperation. The place was half full with locals who looked at them with the mild interest of people watching reality TV. A waitress in her 60s with Deb on her name tag appeared with menus and coffee. "You two look like you had a rough morning." "Campsite flooded," Ethan said. "Oh, honey, nobody camps in storm season. Didn't you check the forecast?" Charlotte and Ethan looked at each other. "No," they said simultaneously. Deb shook her head. "City people. What can I get you?" They ordered everything: pancakes, eggs, bacon, hash browns, toast, more coffee. When it arrived, they ate like survivors of a shipwreck. Charlotte couldn't remember the last time food tasted this good. Probably because she usually ate expensive meals at expensive restaurants where the portions were tiny and the atmosphere was competitive. "This is the best breakfast I've had in years," she said through a mouthful of pancake. "Because you're actually hungry," Ethan said. "Not just eating because it's mealtime." That's depressingly accurate. They finished eating and sat in the vinyl booth drinking coffee while rain streaked the windows and turned Main Street into a river. The diner's warmth, the food coma setting in, and the exhaustion from the morning made everything feel slightly unreal. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said. "Sure." "Why don't you have people, family, friends, someone who'd notice you disappeared?" Charlotte wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. "I have people, employees, board members, networking contacts, people who want things from me. But actual relationships?" She shrugged. "I dated someone for 3 years. Ended 2 years ago. He proposed, and I realized I felt nothing. Not love, not fear of commitment, just nothing. We broke up. He got married 6 months later to someone he actually loved. That had to hurt. It should have. But I just felt relieved, which is worse, somehow." She took a sip of coffee. "After that, I stopped trying, focused on work, convinced myself that was enough." "Was it?" "No." The honesty in that single word sat between them. "What about you?" Charlotte asked. "Do you have family? Besides Mia?" "Parents died in a car accident when I was 23. No siblings. Sarah's family blamed me for her death, cancer, but somehow still my fault for not catching it sooner, not pushing harder for treatment. Pick your reason." He stared into his coffee. "Mia's all I've got. And you left her for 2 weeks. With a woman she loves who'll take better care of her than I do half the time." He looked up. "You think I'm a terrible father?" "I think you're human. And I think sometimes being a good parent means showing your kid that adults need to take care of themselves too." Ethan seemed to consider this. "Sarah would have liked you." "Yeah?" She had no patience for fake people. You're the most honest person I've met in years. That's sad. Little bit, yeah. They paid. Ethan tried to grab the check. Charlotte grabbed it faster and headed back to the motel. The storm had settled into a steady rain that looked like it planned to last days. In the room, their gear was still wet but less actively dripping. We should stay another night, Charlotte said. Let everything dry properly. That's another $80, which I'm paying for. Charlotte, Ethan, I'm worth $2.3 billion. Letting me pay for a motel room isn't going to destroy your masculinity. He opened his mouth, closed it. 2.3 billion? Give or take. Jesus. You really didn't know? I knew you were rich. I didn't know you were rich. He sat on the bed. Why are you here? You could be anywhere, doing anything. Why are you in a crappy motel room with a mechanic who can't afford an $80 room? Charlotte sat next to him. Because in the last 2 days, I've felt more alive than I have in 5 years. Because you don't want anything from me except company. Because when I fell in the mud this morning, you didn't tell me to be careful or ask if I needed help. You just grabbed my arm, and we solved the problem together. She paused. Because I like who I am when I'm with you. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. Charlotte, A knock at the door interrupted whatever he was going to say. They both froze. Housekeeping? A voice called. We're good, Ethan shouted. Don't need anything. Footsteps retreated. The moment had passed. Charlotte could see it in the way Ethan stood up, put distance between them, busied himself rearranging wet gear that didn't need rearranging. I should call Mia, he said. Let her know I'm okay. Use my phone. I picked it up from my mailbox before we left. Charlotte dug it out of her bag, powered it on. It immediately exploded with notifications, texts, emails, missed calls. Her assistant. The board. Investors. The accumulation of 2 days of being unreachable. Ethan stared at the screen. You need to deal with that? No. Charlotte handed him the phone, then watched as he stepped outside under the motel overhang to make his call. She looked at her phone, scrolled through the messages. Most were routine, things her COO could handle, things that didn't actually need her. A few were more urgent. One from her assistant asked if she was okay. One from a board member demanded to know where she'd disappeared to. Charlotte deleted them all. She told them she was taking time off. They just have to deal with it. Ethan came back inside, looking lighter. Mia's good. She made Mrs. Patterson let her plant flowers in the backyard. Apparently there's dirt everywhere, and she's having the time of her life. Sounds like her dad. Yeah, he smiled. She asked about you. Me? I told her I was traveling with a friend. She wanted to know if my friend was nice. What did you tell her? That you were very nice and also very stubborn. Charlotte laughed. Accurate. They spent the rest of the day in the motel room while rain hammered the roof and their gear slowly dried. Charlotte read a paperback she'd found in the van, some thriller from the 90s with a creased spine and yellowed pages. Ethan tried to nap but gave up after 20 minutes of staring at the ceiling. Around dinner time, they ventured back to Millie's and ate burgers that were greasy and perfect. The diner had emptied except for an old man at the counter reading a newspaper and nursing coffee. Storm's supposed to break tomorrow, Deb announced, refilling their cups without asking. Thank God, Ethan said. Where you folks headed? West, generally, Charlotte said. That's not much of a destination. It's all we've got, Deb smiled. Best kind of trip. My husband and I drove to Oregon once with no plan at all. Got lost in the mountains, ran out of gas twice, almost got eaten by a bear. Best 3 weeks of our lives. She looked between them. You two married? No, they said together. Huh. Give it time. She walked away before either could respond. Back at the motel, they watched bad TV and didn't talk about what Deb had said. Around 10, they got ready for bed. Awkward again now that they weren't soaking wet and running on adrenaline. Charlotte climbed into her bed. Ethan climbed into his. The room felt too quiet after 2 days of engine noise and storm sounds. Ethan? Yeah? I'm glad you invited me. I'm glad you said yes. She could hear him breathing in the dark, could feel the space between the beds like a physical thing. Charlotte? Yeah? Are you scared? Of what? This, whatever this is. She thought about lying, decided against it. Terrified. Me too. Neither of them slept well. Charlotte kept waking to unfamiliar sounds, the ice machine down the hall, cars on the wet highway, Ethan shifting in his sleep. Every time she woke, she felt the pull of the old life waiting for her back home. The meetings, the responsibilities, the numbness. Then she'd remember the feeling of grabbing Ethan's arm in the flood, working together to save their gear, and the pull would weaken. By morning, the storm had passed. They woke to sunlight streaming through the gap in the curtains and birds singing like they'd personally survived the apocalypse. Their gear was dry. The van started on the first try. They loaded everything back in, checked out of the motel, and stood in the parking lot looking at each other. "Which way?" Ethan asked. Charlotte pulled out the map, studied it, pointed. "There's supposed to be a hot spring about 60 miles northwest, completely undeveloped, just pools in the middle of nowhere." Sounds made up. Only one way to find out. They got back on the road. The world after the storm looked scrubbed clean. Colors seemed brighter. The air smelled like wet earth and possibilities. They drove with the windows down, letting the wind mess up their hair. And for the first time since they'd left, Ethan felt like maybe this trip wasn't a disaster. Maybe it was exactly what it needed to be. The hot springs turned out to be real. 3 natural pools steaming in a valley surrounded by red rocks and scrub brush. No facilities, no people, just water bubbling up from deep underground at temperatures that made the air shimmer. They parked at the trailhead and hiked in with towels and water bottles. The trail was muddy from the storm, and they slipped and laughed and caught each other when the path got steep. By the time they reached the springs, they were sweaty and dirty and grinning like idiots. "This is incredible," Charlotte said. They'd brought bathing suits. Charlotte had grabbed one from her closet in those frantic 8 minutes before leaving and changed behind rocks. The water was almost too hot, but after sitting in it for a minute, it felt perfect. Charlotte let her head fall back against the smooth stone. Let the heat sink into muscles she didn't know were tense. Let herself just exist without thinking about quarterly earnings or board meetings or the fact that she'd abandoned her entire life to sit in a hot spring with a man she barely knew. "I don't want to go back," she said. Ethan opened his eyes. "To the van? To anything, to my old life, to being that person." She looked at him. "I know that sounds dramatic. It sounds honest. Same thing sometimes." They soaked until their fingers pruned and the sun started sinking. Hiked back to the van in comfortable silence. Made dinner on the camp stove. Instant rice and canned beans that somehow tasted better than it had any right to. As darkness fell, they sat on the van's bumper looking at stars that were just beginning to appear. "How many days has it been?" Charlotte asked. Ethan counted in his head. 4. "Feels longer." "Yeah, feels like a different life entirely." He didn't disagree. Somewhere in the distance, an animal called out. Something wild and lonely. Charlotte found herself moving closer to Ethan, their shoulders touching. He didn't move away. "Tomorrow," he said, "there's supposed to be a canyon about 100 miles from here, like the Grand Canyon but smaller, less touristy. You want to see it?" "Yeah, do you?" Charlotte thought about her penthouse apartment, her corner office, the life that was waiting for her like a trap. "I want to see everything. Everything's a lot of ground to cover. Good thing we have time." They sat there until the cold drove them into the van, climbed into the bed together, less awkward now, more familiar. Lay in the dark listening to each other breathe. "Charlotte? Thanks for being here. Thanks for letting me." She fell asleep with his warmth beside her and dreamed of roads that never ended. The canyon turned out to be a bust. They drove the 100 miles through desert that stretched flat and beige in every direction, following hand-painted signs that promised natural wonder ahead and amazing views this way, only to arrive at a glorified ditch with a $5 parking fee and a gift shop selling rocks that obviously came from somewhere else. "This is disappointing," Charlotte said, standing at the viewing platform that overlooked what was essentially a large crack in the earth. "That's one word for it." Ethan leaned on the railing. "The pictures online made it look deeper." "Everything looks better online." They stayed for maybe 10 minutes, took no photos, and drove away feeling vaguely cheated by the universe. It was late afternoon, and the heat had turned oppressive, the kind of dry heat that made breathing feel like work. "We need to find somewhere to stay tonight," Ethan said, checking the fuel gauge. "And gas. We're down to a quarter tank. There was a town on the map, about 30 miles back the way we came." "That's the wrong direction." "Does it matter? We don't have a destination anyway." She had a point. Ethan turned the van around. The town was called Cottonwood, though there wasn't a cottonwood tree visible anywhere. Just low adobe-style buildings, a main street that looked like a movie set from the 50s, and a population that couldn't have broken 4 digits if every dog and cat was counted. They found a gas station that looked like it predated the interstate highway system. An old man in overalls was hand-painting prices on the pump sign when they pulled in. "Help you?" he called. "Need to fill up," Ethan said. "And maybe directions to a campground?" The old man, his name tag said Earl, shook his head. "Nearest campground's 40 miles east, but there's a motel right there if you need beds." He pointed down the street at a building that might have been white once but had faded to the color of old teeth. Ethan looked at Charlotte. "What do you think?" "I think I'm tired of sleeping in the van." "Me too." They filled the tank, bought overpriced snacks from Earl's ancient vending machine, and drove the 3 blocks to the Cottonwood Motor Lodge. The office smelled like mothballs and burnt coffee. A woman in her 70s with hair dyed an aggressive shade of red checked them in without asking questions. $60 a night, she said. Cash only. No refunds. Ethan pulled out his wallet. Charlotte beat him to it, laying 320s on the counter before he could object. "We're splitting it," she said. "Charlotte, I'm literally a billionaire, Ethan. Let me pay for the motel room." The woman behind the counter raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She handed them a key attached to a plastic diamond. "Room 7, checkouts at 10. The room was cleaner than the Desert Rose had been, but still firmly in the category of places that charged by the hour in their previous lives. 1 bed this time, a queen that sagged in the middle. Charlotte looked at it, looked at Ethan, and decided not to make it weird. "I need a shower," she announced. "A long one." "Use all the hot water you want. I'll go find dinner." Charlotte showered until the steam made it hard to breathe, washing off layers of road dust and sunscreen and the general grime that came from living in a van. When she emerged, Ethan was back with a pizza box and 2 bottles of beer that were already sweating in the heat. "Closest thing to real food I could find," he said. They sat on the bed because there was nowhere else to sit, and ate pizza that was mostly grease and cheese with a vague suggestion of toppings underneath. The beer was cheap and cold and tasted like college. Charlotte couldn't remember the last time she'd had either pizza or beer. Probably years. Definitely before she'd hired a personal nutritionist who gently but firmly removed both from her life. "This is terrible," she said, reaching for another slice. "The pizza or the beer?" "Both. I love it." Ethan smiled, and Charlotte realized she'd been seeing that smile more often. The real one. Not the careful version he wore when he was being polite or trying not to burden someone with his problems. They finished the pizza and most of the beer while bad TV played in the background, some reality show about people buying storage units. Neither of them were really watching. The room felt small in a way that wasn't uncomfortable, just intimate. "Can I ask you something personal?" Ethan said. "You've seen me fall in mud and smell like wet dog. I think we're past the personal boundary. Do you miss it? Your old life?" Charlotte thought about it. Really thought about it. "I miss my assistant. She's the only person who actually knows me. And I miss my morning coffee routine. There's this place near my office that makes a cortado that tastes like heaven." She paused. "But the rest of it? The meetings, the networking events, the constant performance? No, I don't miss it at all." "What about the money? The power?" "Money's still there whether I'm home or not. Power." She shrugged. "I spent 10 years building power I didn't know what to do with. Turns out, having influence over 3,000 employees and billion-dollar contracts doesn't make you feel powerful. It just makes you feel responsible for things you can't control." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Sarah used to say I was obsessed with control, with fixing things, with making everything work out right, even when life wasn't cooperating. Was she right? Yeah, I rebuilt that van 3 times because I couldn't accept it wasn't perfect. Took me 8 months to do something that should have taken 3. He looked at his hands, and I still couldn't control the radiator hose blowing. Is that a metaphor? Probably. I'm too tired to figure out for what. Charlotte laughed. She was buzzed from the beer, just enough to make everything feel softer around the edges. You know what's funny? I spent a decade making plans. 5-year projections, quarterly goals, strategic roadmaps. And the best thing I've done in years is climbing into your van with no plan at all. The van that's broken down twice in a week. Exactly. They looked at each other and something shifted. The air felt heavier. Charlotte became very aware of how close they were sitting, how Ethan's knee was touching hers, how she could see the exact color of his eyes in the lamplight, brown with flecks of gold. "Ethan," she said quietly. "Yeah? I think I'm about to do something stupid." "Yeah?" "Yeah." She kissed him. She kissed. It wasn't smooth or practiced or anything like the romantic scenes in movies. Their noses bumped. Charlotte's hand found his shoulder at an awkward angle. Ethan made a surprised sound that was half laugh, half something else. Then he kissed her back, and it stopped being awkward. His hand found the side of her face. Her fingers tangled in his hair. The kiss deepened, shifted, became something that made Charlotte's entire body feel electric. They broke apart just long enough to breathe, and she saw her own surprise reflected in his expression. "Was that stupid?" she asked. "Little bit." "Want to be stupid again?" "Yeah." This time when they kissed, there was no hesitation. Ethan pulled her closer and Charlotte went willingly, climbing into his lap in a way that would have embarrassed her sober self, but felt exactly right in the moment. His hands found her waist. Her hands found his chest. The kiss turned hungry, desperate, like they'd been holding back something for days and finally stopped fighting it. They broke apart, breathing hard. "We should talk about this," Ethan said. "Probably. Figure out what this means." "Definitely." Neither of them moved to start that conversation. Instead, they sat there, Charlotte still in Ethan's lap, both of them trying to catch their breath and process what had just happened. "I'm a mess," Ethan said finally. "I have a kid. I work 60 hours a week for barely enough money. I live in a house that's falling apart and drive a van that breaks down constantly. I can't give you anything you don't already have. I don't want things I already have." Charlotte touched his face, made him look at her. "I want this feeling, this version of myself that exists when I'm with you." She paused. "I want you." "Charlotte, I know it's complicated. I know it doesn't make sense. I know we barely know each other, and this could be the worst decision either of us has made." She took a breath. "But I haven't felt this alive in years, and I'm not ready to give that up." Ethan studied her face like he was memorizing it. "What happens when the trip ends, when we go back to real life?" "I don't know." "That doesn't scare you?" "It terrifies me." She kissed him again, softer this time, but not as much as going back to the way things were. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other, not quite ready to take the next step, but not willing to pull away either. Eventually, Charlotte shifted off his lap, and they lay down on the bed, still dressed, still uncertain, but no longer pretending there wasn't something real happening between them. "This bed is terrible," Charlotte said. "Yeah. I've slept in 5-star hotels all over the world. This might be the worst mattress I've ever encountered. And yet I don't want to be anywhere else." Ethan turned to face her. They were close enough that she could feel his breath, see the exact way his hair fell across his forehead. "Can I tell you something?" "Always. I'm falling for you, have been since you handed me water on the side of the highway and didn't once make me feel like an idiot for the van breaking down." He said it quietly, like admitting a secret. "And it scares the hell out of me because I don't know how this works. How we work." Charlotte felt something crack open in her chest. "I'm falling for you too. Have been since you let me pay for the motel without making it a fight about pride or masculinity." She smiled. "And you're right. It's terrifying." "So what do we do?" "I have no idea. I've never been good at relationships. I'm too focused on work, too independent, too human. I was going to say difficult." Same thing. They lay there in the terrible motel room with the TV still playing its reality show about storage units and dreams deferred. Charlotte felt the weight of what they'd just admitted settling over them like a blanket. It should have felt heavy, but instead it felt like relief. "Stay with me tonight," Ethan said. "Just sleep. No expectations. Just Be here. I'm not going anywhere. They fell asleep, still dressed, still on top of the covers, Charlotte's head on Ethan's shoulder and his arm wrapped around her. It wasn't romantic or sexy or anything like the dramatic scenes in movies. It was better. It was real. Charlotte woke before dawn to the sound of Ethan's phone buzzing. He fumbled for it in the dark, squinted at the screen, and went very still. "What is it?" she asked. "Text from Mrs. Patterson. Mia's fine," he added quickly. "But she's asking when I'm coming home. She misses me." The words hung in the air between them. "How long have we been gone?" Charlotte asked. 6 days. "That's all?" "Yeah." It felt like longer, like months, like a whole different lifetime. Ethan put the phone down and stared at the ceiling. "I told her 2 weeks, maybe 3, but you're thinking about going back early." "I'm thinking about whether I'm being selfish, chasing some fantasy while my daughter is home missing her dad." Charlotte sat up. Her hair was a mess, and her clothes were wrinkled from sleeping in them, and she didn't care. "Is this a fantasy? This thing between us?" "I don't know. Is it? It doesn't feel like one." "No," Ethan agreed. "It feels real, which makes it scarier." They sat in the pre-dawn darkness, both thinking thoughts they weren't quite ready to say out loud. Finally, Charlotte spoke. "Tell me about your money situation, the real one." Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Why?" "Because you keep trying to pay for things you can't afford and refusing help when it's offered. And I think money is the thing you're not saying out loud." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I have about $800 left. For the whole trip. Gas, food, emergencies, everything. I budgeted for 2 weeks of camping and cheap meals, but we've had the motel rooms, the breakdown, the..." He stopped. "I'm running out faster than I planned." "How much do you need?" "Charlotte, how much would make this trip work? The full 2 weeks? No stress? No constant calculations?" "I'm not taking your money." "That wasn't the question." Ethan rubbed his face. "Maybe another 1,000. 1,500 to be comfortable." Charlotte got up, found her purse, and pulled out her wallet. She counted out $1,500 bills and set them on the nightstand. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked. "Buying us time. Buying us the ability to keep doing this without you constantly worrying about whether we can afford dinner." She sat back down. "It's not charity, it's investment." "In what?" "In this. In us. In whatever the hell we're doing out here." "Charlotte, I can't just take $1,500 from you." "Why not?" Because it's not right. Because I should be able to provide for myself. Because taking money from the woman I'm..." He stopped, the sentence unfinished but obvious. "The woman you're what?" Charlotte pressed. Ethan met her eyes. "The woman I'm falling in love with." The words hit her like a physical thing. She'd known it, felt it growing between them, but hearing it said out loud made it undeniable. "Then let me do this," she said. "Let me remove one thing you have to worry about so we can focus on the actually important stuff." "Like what?" "Like figuring out what happens when this trip ends. Like whether what we're feeling is real or just road trip adrenaline. Like whether you can love someone who lives in a completely different world than you do." "Can I?" "I don't know. That's what we're out here trying to figure out." Ethan looked at the money on the nightstand, looked at Charlotte. Something in his expression shifted, pride giving way to something more practical. "Okay. Yeah? Yeah. But I'm keeping track. And someday, somehow, I'm paying you back. Deal." He pulled her back down next to him and they lay there watching the room slowly lighten as dawn crept in through the cheap curtains. Charlotte felt the tension drain out of Ethan's body as the money stress lifted, and she realized this was what partnership felt like. Not grand gestures or romantic proclamations, just two people solving problems together. They checked out of the motel at 9:30 and found a diner that served breakfast until 11. Over eggs and hash browns that were better than they had any right to be, they studied the map and argued about where to go next. "There's a state park here," Ethan pointed. "Supposed to have hiking trails and rock formations." "Or we could go here," Charlotte indicated a spot further west. "According to the guidebook, there's a ghost town, completely abandoned mining town from the 1800s. Ghost town sounds touristy." Everything's touristy if enough people go there. Doesn't mean it's not worth seeing. They compromised by deciding to head in the general direction of the ghost town and see what they found along the way. This was becoming their pattern, loose plans that evolved based on mood and opportunity and whatever looked interesting from the road. The drive took them through landscape that kept changing. Desert gave way to scrubland, which gave way to pine forest that appeared like a miracle after miles of brown emptiness. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. The air smelled like trees instead of dust. Around noon, they pulled off at a roadside overlook that promised scenic views and actually delivered. A valley stretched below them, green and vast, cut through by a river that caught the sunlight and turned silver. They ate lunch sitting on the van's bumper, sandwiches they'd made that morning from gas station supplies. The bread was getting stale and the cheese was probably a day past optimal, but neither complained. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said. "Sure." "What are you going to tell people when you go back? Your assistant, your board, everyone who works for you?" Charlotte chewed her sandwich, thinking. The truth, probably. That I needed to remember who I was before I became the person everyone expected me to be. Will they understand? Some will, some won't. Some will think I had a breakdown. She shrugged. I don't particularly care which. That's new. What is? You not caring what people think. It's liberating, Charlotte admitted. For 10 years, I performed the role of serious CEO. Never showed weakness, never admitted doubt, never let anyone see me as anything but competent and in control. She looked at him. With you, I don't have to perform. You fell in mud and complained about terrible hot dogs. That's pretty far from performing. Exactly. They finished their sandwiches and kept driving. The ghost town turned out to be less abandoned than advertised. There was a visitor center, a gift shop, and a tour guide in period costume who gave a presentation about mining techniques that put Ethan to sleep standing up. But away from the tourist area, where the ropes stopped and the preservation efforts ended, there were buildings you could actually explore. Charlotte found an old saloon with the bar still intact, bottles still lined up on shelves like everyone had just stepped out for a moment and never came back. This is eerie, she said. This is trespassing, Ethan countered, but he followed her inside anyway. They explored carefully, aware that the floorboards were half-rotted and the ceiling looked questionable. Someone had carved initials into the bar top, dozens of them, layered over decades. Charlotte traced one set with her finger. JH plus MR, 1887. Wonder what happened to them, Ethan said. Maybe they lived happily ever after. Or maybe they died of dysentery 6 months later. It was the 1880s. You're such a romantic. I'm a realist. Charlotte turned to face him. They were standing in an abandoned saloon in a ghost town in the middle of nowhere, and she'd never felt more present in her life. What are we doing, Ethan? Looking at old buildings? You know what I mean. He did. She could see it in his face. We're figuring it out, taking it one day at a time, not making promises we can't keep. That's very practical. One of us has to be. Is that your role? The practical one? I thought it was, but you paid for the motel and solved our money problems with $1,500 like it was nothing. So maybe not. Charlotte stepped closer. What if I said I wanted more than one day at a time? What if I said I wanted to know where this is going? I'd say I have no idea where this is going, Ethan answered honestly. I live in a small house with a 6-year-old. I work with my hands for $40,000 a year. You run a tech empire and have a penthouse and probably things I don't even know about. How do those worlds ever fit together? Maybe they don't have to fit perfectly. Maybe they just have to want to fit. Is that enough? I don't know. Charlotte touched his face. But I know I'm not ready to give this up. Ethan kissed her, and this time there was no hesitation, no awkwardness, just the two of them in a forgotten place figuring out how to be honest with each other. They left the ghost town as the sun started sinking and found a campground that was actually maintained. Real bathrooms, fire pits, picnic tables that weren't falling apart. They set up camp efficiently now, a team that had learned each other's rhythms. Dinner was hot dogs roasted over the fire and beans heated in a pot. Simple, borderline pathetic, and somehow better than anything Charlotte had eaten in months. I have a confession, she said. Yeah? I'm dreading going back to my real life, to being CEO Charlotte instead of just Charlotte. You're allowed to be both. Am I? because they feel like different people. CEO Charlotte wouldn't sleep in a van or eat hot dogs or fall in love with a mechanic she barely knows. She said it without thinking, then froze. I mean, you love me? Ethan asked quietly. Charlotte felt her heart hammering. She could take it back, laugh it off, claim the beer from last night was still affecting her. Instead, she told the truth. Yeah, I think I do. Ethan set down his hot dog, looked at her across the fire. I love you too. Which is insane because it's been less than a week, and I don't know your middle name or your favorite color or what you do on Sundays. Marie Green, and I work every Sunday. See? I know you now. Charlotte laughed, felt tears threatening, and didn't fight them. This is terrifying. Yeah. What do we do with this? I have no idea. Ethan came around the fire and sat next to her. But I know I don't want to lose it. They sat together while the fire burned down and the stars came out, and coyotes started their nightly conversations in the hills. Charlotte leaned against Ethan and tried to imagine what happened next, how this road trip romance translated into actual life, with its schedules and responsibilities and geographic impossibilities. She couldn't see it clearly, but for the first time in years she wanted to try. They woke tangled together in the van's fold-down bed, Charlotte's arm draped across Ethan's chest and his hand resting on her hip, like they'd been sleeping this way for years instead of days. Early morning light filtered through the windows, painting everything gold and soft. Ethan shifted slightly, trying not to wake her, but Charlotte's eyes opened anyway. Hi, she said. Hi. They lay there, not moving, not speaking, just existing in the quiet intimacy of waking up next to someone who mattered. Then Charlotte's phone, which she'd started carrying again out of some lingering sense of responsibility, buzzed from where she'd left it in her bag. She ignored it. It buzzed again and again. You should check that, Ethan said. I really don't want to. Charlotte. She sighed, extracted herself from his warmth, and dug out the phone. 7 missed calls from her assistant Jennifer. 3 texts from board members. 1 email marked urgent from her COO. Problem? Ethan asked. Potential problem. Charlotte opened the email, read it twice, and felt her stomach drop. There's an issue with one of our major contracts. Client is threatening to pull out over a delivery delay. My COO is asking for approval to offer them a discount to smooth things over. Can he handle it without you? Yeah, he's more than capable. She stared at the screen. But the board wants me to personally call the client, do the relationship management thing. So do it. From a campground in the middle of nowhere while wearing yesterday's clothes and smelling like campfire? Why not? You're still the same CEO whether you're in a boardroom or a van. Charlotte looked at him. You make it sound simple, isn't it? Nothing about my life has ever been simple. But she made the call anyway, walking away from the campsite to get better reception. She stood on a hiking trail that overlooked a valley still shrouded in morning mist and put on her CEO voice, confident, authoritative, the version of herself that had negotiated billion-dollar deals. The client, a logistics VP named Marcus, who she'd met exactly twice, was predictably angry about the delay. Charlotte let him vent for 3 minutes, then calmly explained the supply chain issues, offered a 5% discount on the next quarter, and promised personally oversight on the delivery timeline. Marcus agreed. The crisis was averted. The whole conversation took 12 minutes. When she walked back to the campsite, Ethan had coffee brewing on the camp stove and was attempting to make eggs in a pan that was absolutely not designed for eggs. How'd it go? He asked. Fine. Crisis averted. Company still standing. She accepted the coffee he handed her. Is it weird that I feel nothing? Like that was a potential 7-figure loss and I just fixed it and moved on. Maybe you're good at your job. Or maybe I'm too disconnected from it to care anymore. Charlotte watched him wrestle with the eggs. Need help? I've got it. He did not have it. The eggs were burning on one side and raw on the other. Charlotte gently took the spatula from him and salvaged what she could. They ate breakfast sitting on the van's bumper, passing the pan back and forth. And Charlotte thought about how domestic this felt. How normal. Like they were a couple who did this every morning instead of 2 people who'd known each other barely a week. What day is it? She asked. Ethan checked his phone. Thursday. We've been gone 8 days. Yeah. 6 more until you need to be back. The number sat between them like a countdown timer. 6 days until this ended. 6 days until they had to figure out if what they'd found on the road could survive in the real world. We should talk about it, Ethan said. What happens after? I know. But not right now? Not right now, Charlotte agreed. They packed up camp and got back on the road. The plan, such as it was, involved heading further west toward the coast. Ethan had never seen the Pacific Ocean. Charlotte had seen it dozens of times from business trips to San Francisco and Los Angeles, but never from the ground level. Never in a way that mattered. The drive took them through mountains that appeared suddenly after miles of flatland, rising up like the earth had decided to get dramatic. The road twisted and climbed, the van's engine straining on the steeper grades. Twice Ethan had to pull over to let the transmission cool down. This van is held together by hope and spite, Charlotte observed during the second stop. That's most of my life, honestly. Mine too. They reached the summit around noon and pulled into a scenic overlook where other travelers had stopped to take pictures and complain about altitude headaches. The view was objectively stunning, mountains stretching in every direction, pine trees marching down slopes like dark green soldiers, and somewhere in the far distance, a glimpse of water that might have been a lake or might have been atmosphere playing tricks. Charlotte stood at the railing and felt the wind pull at her hair. Ethan came up beside her, close enough that their arms touched. You okay? He asked. Just thinking. About? About how I spent 10 years chasing success and completely missed the part where I was supposed to enjoy it. She gestured at the view. I probably flew over mountains like this 100 times. Never once thought to actually see them. You're seeing them now. Yeah. She leaned against him. I am. They stayed at the overlook longer than necessary, neither wanting to get back in the van, neither ready to acknowledge that time was running out. Finally, a tour bus pulled up and disgorged 40 seniors with cameras, and the moment shattered into noise and questions about where the bathrooms were. Back on the road, they descended the other side of the mountains into a valley that seemed to go on forever. Small towns appeared and disappeared, places with names like Pine Ridge and Clearwater and Hope Springs that looked like they'd been forgotten by time and were making the best of it. Around 3 in the afternoon, the van started making a noise. It wasn't the catastrophic sound of the radiator hose blowing, or the concerning knock of bad timing. This was subtler, a rhythmic thumping that came from somewhere underneath, like someone was hitting the frame with a rubber mallet in time with the wheels. You hear that? Charlotte asked. Yeah. Ethan's hands tightened on the wheel. I hear it. What is it? I don't know. Could be a tire, could be the suspension, could be anything. He looked for a place to pull over. They were on a 2-lane highway with no shoulder, just pavement and then immediate ditch. I need to find somewhere to stop. The thumping got louder. Other drivers were starting to stare as they passed. Ethan pushed the van to the next exit, which promised services 2 miles, and delivered on that promise in the form of a truck stop that had seen better decades. He guided the van into the parking lot and killed the engine. The sudden silence was almost worse than the noise. Stay here, he said. Not a chance. They both got out. Ethan walked around the van, checking each tire, looking for obvious damage. Charlotte crouched next to the rear driver's side wheel and saw it immediately. Ethan. Here. He came over, looked, and swore. The tire was shredded, not flat, but the tread was separating from the sidewall in a way that would have led to a blowout if they'd driven much further. How did I miss this? Ethan asked, more to himself than to her. Because you can't predict everything. We hit that pothole back in the mountains, remember? Probably started the damage. I should have checked afterward. Ethan, I should have checked. He stood up, rubbed his face. Okay, we need a new tire. Hopefully they sell them here. The truck stop garage did sell tires, but not the size they needed. The mechanic, a kid who couldn't have been more than 20 with Jake stitched on his coveralls, shook his head apologetically. I can order one, Jake offered. Have it here by tomorrow afternoon. Tomorrow afternoon? Ethan repeated. Yeah, man. Sorry. This is kind of a weird size. Not a lot of people driving 1987 Dodge vans anymore. Ethan looked at Charlotte. Charlotte looked back, trying to telegraph support, while her mind raced through the implications. Another delay. Another night somewhere. More money, more time, more reality creeping into their bubble. "Fine," Ethan said. "Order the tire." "You need a place to stay? There's a motel about a mile up the road." "Of course there is." They walked the mile because the van wasn't going anywhere on 3 good tires and a shredded one. Their bags were heavy and the afternoon sun was brutal, and by the time they reached the Crossroads Inn, both were sweating and irritable. The room was nicer than the previous motels, actual art on the walls, a TV from this decade, a bathroom that didn't immediately trigger health concerns. 2 beds again. Charlotte was starting to notice that they always ended up sharing one anyway. Ethan threw his bag on the floor and sat heavily on the nearest bed. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For this disaster of a trip, for the breakdowns, for the delays, for—" "Stop." Charlotte sat next to him. "This isn't a disaster. We've been stranded twice. We got flooded. We're running out of time. And I've never been happier." She said it simply, honestly. "Ethan, my perfect life in my perfect penthouse made me want to disappear. This messy, chaotic, falling apart trip made me want to stay." He looked at her. "Even with all the problems?" "Especially with the problems, because we solved them together." Ethan pulled her close, and Charlotte went willingly, tucking herself against his side. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just holding each other while the reality of their situation pressed in from all sides. Charlotte's phone rang. She ignored it. It rang again. "You should get that," Ethan said. "I know," but she didn't move. Ethan reached across her, grabbed the phone from where she'd dropped it, and handed it to her. The screen showed Jennifer calling for the 3rd time. Charlotte answered. "Hey, Jen." "Oh, thank God." Her assistant's voice was tight with stress. "Charlotte, I've been trying to reach you all day." "I know. I'm sorry. What's going on?" "The board wants to schedule an emergency meeting tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Pacific. They're concerned about the optics of you being away during the contract situation." "The contract situation that I resolved this morning?" "They know you resolved it, but there's been questions, Charlotte, about where you are, what you're doing, whether you're—" Jennifer paused. "Whether you're okay." Charlotte closed her eyes. "I'm fine. Are you?" "Because you disappeared without telling anyone except me. You've been unreachable for days at a time. People are worried. People are worried about their stock options and quarterly bonuses, not about me. I'm worried about you." That hit harder than Charlotte expected. Jennifer had been her assistant for 5 years, had worked late nights, weekends, holidays, had probably seen more of Charlotte's life than anyone except Charlotte herself. "I'm okay," Charlotte said more gently. "I promise. I just needed space to think." "Well, the space is officially over. The board is not requesting your presence tomorrow. They're demanding it." "It's a video call?" "Yes." "Fine. I'll be there." "Thank you." Jennifer exhaled. "And Charlotte? Whatever you're doing out there, I hope it's worth it." Charlotte looked at Ethan, who was pretending not to listen while obviously listening. "Yeah, it is." She hung up, sat with the phone in her hands. "Board meeting?" Ethan asked. "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., which means I need to look like a CEO instead of someone who's been living in a van. We can make that work. Can we?" Charlotte gestured at herself. Wrinkled clothes, hair that hadn't seen a professional stylist in over a week, skin that was actually showing color from being outside. "I look like a different person." "You are a different person. That's kind of the point, isn't it?" She didn't have an answer for that. They ordered pizza delivery, apparently the one restaurant in town that still did that, and ate it while watching a movie neither of them really cared about. The silence between them had changed. It was heavier now, weighted with things they needed to say but didn't know how to start. Finally, Charlotte muted the TV. "We need to talk about what happens when we go back." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, because in 6 days, you go home to Mia, and I go back to my company, and we live 2 completely different lives in the same neighborhood." "I know. So what do we do? Pretend this didn't happen? Try to make it work somehow? What?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "I don't want to pretend it didn't happen." "Neither do I. But I also don't know how to make it work." You're a billionaire CEO. I'm a mechanic with a kid and a mortgage. Where do those lives intersect? At the edges, Charlotte said. In the small moments. Early mornings and late nights. Weekends and holidays. That's not enough. Isn't it? Would you rather have nothing? No. He took her hand. I'd rather have everything. But I'm trying to be realistic about what everything looks like for us. Charlotte felt tears threatening and pushed them back. I don't want realistic. Realistic got me a penthouse I hate and a company I'm disconnected from. I want this. I want you. Even if it's messy and complicated and nothing like what a relationship is supposed to look like. Charlotte, I'm in love with you, Ethan. Not in a road trip way or a fantasy way. In a real, terrifying, this is going to change my entire life way. She said it all at once before courage could fail her. And I know that's insane because it's been 8 days, but I also know I've never felt this sure about anything. Ethan pulled her into his lap, and Charlotte went, wrapping her arms around his neck and holding on like he was the only solid thing in a world that had started spinning. I love you too, he said into her hair. And you're right. It's insane, but I don't care. They kissed, and this time there was desperation in it. The knowledge that time was running out, that soon they'd have to face reality instead of hiding from it on back roads and cheap motels. Charlotte pulled back just enough to look at him. Stay with me tonight. Really stay with me. I am. You know what I mean. Ethan did know. She could see it in his eyes, want and hesitation, and the same desperate need she felt. Are you sure? He asked. I've never been more sure of anything. What happened next wasn't smooth or choreographed or anything like the movies. There were awkward moments and nervous laughter and the fumbling reality of two people who hadn't done this in a while. But it was real. It was honest. It was them. Afterward, they lay tangled in sheets that smelled like industrial detergent, Charlotte's head on Ethan's chest and his arm around her shoulders. That was, Ethan started. Yeah. I know. They didn't need more words than that. Charlotte fell asleep feeling safer than she had in years. Ethan stayed awake longer, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how to hold on to something that felt this good when everything in the world was designed to pull them apart. Morning came too fast. Charlotte's alarm went off at 7:30, giving her 90 minutes to transform back into CEO. Charlotte for the video call. She showered, dried her hair as best she could with the motel's weak hairdryer, and put on the one professional outfit she'd packed, black slacks and a white blouse that was wrinkled but passable. Ethan watched from the bed. You look like you again. Is that good or bad? Neither. Just different. Charlotte set up her laptop on the desk, tested the Wi-Fi, barely functional but enough, and waited for 9 o'clock with mounting dread. The call connected. 6 board members appeared in their Brady Bunch grid of boxes, all in their offices or home studies, all wearing the carefully neutral expressions of people preparing for confrontation. Charlotte, said Richard Chen, the board chairman, thank you for joining us. Of course. We wanted to touch base about the recent contract situation, which I resolved yesterday morning. Yes, we appreciate that. Richard glanced at someone off screen. But there are concerns about your availability, about your current location. Charlotte felt her spine straighten. I'm on approved time off, 2 weeks. I was very clear about this. You were clear about the time off, less clear about disappearing completely. I haven't disappeared. I'm reachable. I'm handling issues as they arise. From where exactly? This from Margaret Torres, the CFO, and the one board member who'd never particularly liked Charlotte. Does that matter? It matters when major clients are asking questions, when the media starts speculating about your whereabouts, when your COO is fielding concerns about leadership stability. In the background, Charlotte saw Ethan get out of bed and quietly start gathering his things, giving her privacy. She wanted to tell him to stay, but she was too focused on not showing weakness to the vultures on her screen. My personal life is not board business, Charlotte said evenly. It is when it affects company perception, Margaret countered. We have a responsibility to shareholders. Boss? I have a responsibility to myself. The words came out sharper than intended. For 10 years, I've given this company everything, every hour, every decision, every piece of myself. I'm taking 2 weeks. That's not unreasonable. Richard held up a hand. No one is saying it's unreasonable. We're just asking for more communication, more transparency about your availability. I'm available. I answered the call. I'm on this meeting. What more do you want? The silence that followed told her exactly what they wanted. Her back in the office, back in control, back in the box they'd built for her. Fine, Charlotte said. I'll check in daily, send status updates, be available for emergencies. Will that satisfy everyone? Reluctant nods around the grid. Good. Is there anything else? There wasn't. The call ended and Charlotte closed her laptop harder than necessary. She sat there, still wearing her CEO armor, feeling like she'd just lost something important, even though she'd technically won. Ethan came back from the bathroom, dressed and ready for the day. That sounded rough. They think I'm having a breakdown. Are you? Charlotte laughed, but it sounded broken. Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally having a breakthrough and they can't tell the difference. Ethan sat next to her, took her hand. What do you want to do? I want to tell them all to go to hell. I want to quit. I want to stay on this trip forever and never go back. She took a shaky breath. But I can't. Because 3,000 people depend on me. Because I built something that matters. Because walking away would be irresponsible and selfish, and you're allowed to be selfish sometimes. Am I? Charlotte, you've spent your whole adult life being responsible. For your company, your employees, your investors. When do you get to be responsible to yourself? She didn't have an answer. They checked out of the motel and walked back to the truck stop to check on the tire. Jake had it installed by noon, and the van was road ready again. They paid, Charlotte paid, over Ethan's token protest, and got back on the highway heading west. But something had shifted. The freedom of the first week had given way to the weight of reality. Charlotte kept checking her phone. Ethan kept glancing at her with concern. The miles passed, but the joy had leaked out somewhere. Around 3 in the afternoon, they stopped at a rest area. Charlotte got out and walked to the edge of the parking lot, staring at a view of absolutely nothing, just scrubland and telephone poles and the distant shimmer of heat on pavement. Ethan found her there. Talk to me, he said. I don't know how to do this. Go back to my life and keep this. Keep us. She turned to face him, and I'm terrified that trying to do both means I'll lose everything. So what do you want? I want to not have to choose. That's not an option. I know. Charlotte felt tears finally spill over. I know. Ethan pulled her close, and she cried into his shirt, messy, ugly crying that she would have been mortified by a week ago. But now it just felt like release. We'll figure it out, he said, somehow. Charlotte wanted to believe him, but as they stood in a rest area in the middle of nowhere with 4 days left and a future that looked impossible, she wasn't sure belief was enough. They drove in silence for the next hour, the weight of unspoken decisions filling the van like a third passenger neither wanted to acknowledge. Charlotte kept her eyes on the landscape rolling past, endless fields giving way to pine forests, then back to scrubland, the same cycle repeating like the world couldn't make up its mind what it wanted to be. Her phone buzzed. She ignored it, buzzed again. You gonna get that? Ethan asked. No. Charlotte, I don't want to talk to them. Any of them. She turned the phone face down in her lap. For just a few more days, I want to be nobody. Not a CEO, not a board member's problem, just me. Ethan glanced at her, then back at the road. You know it doesn't work that way. Why not? Because running away doesn't solve anything. It just delays the inevitable. Charlotte felt anger spike. Is that what you think this is? Running away? Isn't it? No. It's... She stopped, trying to find words that didn't sound defensive. It's trying to find something I lost. Something I didn't even know was missing until I climbed into this van. And did you find it? Yeah, I found you. Ethan's hands tightened on the wheel. What if I'm not enough? What if you go back and realize this whole thing was just escapism? A billionaire playing poor for 2 weeks before returning to her real life? The accusation hit like a slap. You think that's what this is to me? I don't know what to think. You've got a company, responsibilities, a whole world waiting for you, and I've got a kid, a mortgage, and a van that barely runs. How do those things coexist? We make them coexist. How, Charlotte? How exactly does that work? His voice rose slightly. You come visit on weekends? Slum it with the mechanic when you're bored with boardrooms? What happens when the novelty wears off? Charlotte stared at him, feeling something crack in her chest. Is that really what you think of me? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer. No, but I'm scared. And when I'm scared, I say stupid things. What are you scared of? That you'll realize I can't give you anything close to what you already have. That this ends the second we cross back into our neighborhood. That I'm going to fall completely in love with you and then watch you disappear back into a life I can't be part of. You already are. What? Completely in love with me. You already are. I can see it every time you look at me. Charlotte turned in her seat to face him. And I'm already completely in love with you, so we're both terrified and there's no going back from this. The question is what we do next. Ethan pulled the van over to the shoulder, sudden, abrupt, and killed the engine. They were on an empty stretch of highway with nothing around them but sagebrush and sky. He turned to her. I don't know what we do next, he said. I've never done anything like this before. Sarah and I grew up together. We were high school sweethearts. It was easy because our lives already fit. But you and me? We're from different worlds. So we build a new world, one that fits both of us. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's probably going to be the hardest thing either of us has ever done. Charlotte reached for his hand. But the alternative is walking away from this. And I'm not willing to do that. Are you? Ethan looked at their joined hands. No. Then we figure it out, one step at a time. Starting with what? Starting with finishing this trip. We have 4 days left. Let's not waste them being scared of what comes after. Ethan studied her face, and Charlotte watched the fear in his expression shift into something that looked like hope. Okay? Yeah? Yeah. 4 more days of not thinking about reality. Deal. They got back on the road. The tension that had been suffocating them for the last hour loosened slightly, though it didn't disappear completely. Charlotte knew they were just postponing the inevitable conversation, but she didn't care. 4 more days felt like a gift. Around sunset, they reached the coast. The ocean appeared suddenly after miles of nothing, a vast expanse of blue that stretched to the horizon and beyond. Ethan pulled into a beachside parking lot, and they both got out, drawn toward the water like it was magnetic. Charlotte had seen the ocean dozens of times, but never like this. Never with sand in her shoes and wind tangling her hair and the smell of salt so strong it felt like breathing something alive. I've never seen the ocean before, Ethan said quietly. Never? Never. We couldn't afford family vacations when I was a kid, and after Sarah got sick, he trailed off. Never had a reason to come. They walked down to where the waves were crashing, neither speaking, just watching the water do what it had done for millions of years before them and would keep doing long after. There was something humbling about it, something that made Charlotte's board meetings and quarterly projections feel absurdly small. You want to know something? Charlotte said. I've been to Paris, London, Tokyo, Singapore. I've stayed in hotels that cost $5,000 a night and eaten at restaurants where you need a reservation 6 months in advance. And I've never felt as present as I do right now, standing on a beach in the middle of nowhere with you. Ethan took her hand. That's because you were performing in all those places. Here, you're just existing. Is that enough? Just existing? It's everything. They stayed on the beach until the sun sank into the ocean and turned the sky impossible shades of orange and pink. Then they found a campground perched on cliffs overlooking the water and set up camp one more time. Dinner was canned soup heated over the camp stove and crackers that had gone soft from humidity. They ate sitting on a picnic bench, watching stars appear one by one over the dark ocean. 3 days left, Charlotte said. Don't. We have to talk about it eventually. I know. Just not tonight. So they didn't talk about it. Instead, they climbed into the van and made love with the sound of waves crashing below them, and Charlotte tried to memorize every detail. The way Ethan's hands felt on her skin, the sound of his breathing, the exact weight of his body against hers. She was building a library of memories to carry back to her old life. The next morning, they woke to fog so thick they couldn't see the ocean they knew was right there. It felt like being inside a cloud. Everything was muted, soft, unreal. Charlotte's phone had a voicemail from Jennifer. She listened to it while Ethan made coffee. Charlotte, I don't know if you're getting these, but the board is asking questions again. They want to schedule another call, and there's been some media speculation about your absence. Nothing major yet, but it's building. Please call me back. She deleted it. Problem? Ethan asked, handing her coffee. Always. Charlotte wrapped both hands around the mug. Jennifer says the media is starting to ask questions about where I am. What are you going to tell them? Nothing. It's none of their business. Charlotte, I'm serious. For once in my life, I'm doing something that's just for me. Not for shareholders, not for employees, not for public image. For me. She looked at him. Is that selfish? Probably, but maybe you've earned the right to be selfish. They spent the day exploring the coast, found tide pools full of sea stars and anemones, walked on beaches where they were the only people for miles, ate fish and chips from a roadside shack that had been there since the 70s, and tasted like grease and perfection. Every moment felt weighted with the knowledge that time was running out. Charlotte caught herself trying to slow things down, to stretch each hour into something that could last longer. But time didn't cooperate. It kept moving forward, indifferent to her wanting it to stop. That night, camped at another clifftop site, Ethan brought it up. 2 days left, he said. Charlotte had been expecting it, but it still hurt to hear out loud. Yeah. We need to make a plan. For after. I know. They sat on the van's bumper, shoulders touching, staring at an ocean they could hear but not see in the darkness. Here's what I'm thinking, Ethan said slowly, like he'd been rehearsing this. When we get back, we don't try to force anything. We just see what happens. I focus on Mia, you focus on your company, and we figure out if there's space for us in our real lives. Charlotte felt her stomach drop. That sounds like a breakup with extra steps. It's not. It is. You're saying we go back to being neighbors who wave politely and pretend this never happened. I'm saying we be realistic about what's possible. And I'm saying I don't want realistic. I want you. Charlotte stood, unable to sit still anymore. Do you know how many times in my life I've been realistic? How many times I've made the practical choice, the sensible decision, the thing that made sense on paper? And where did it get me? Alone in a penthouse feeling nothing. Charlotte. No. Listen to me. She turned to face him. I love you. Not in a practical way or a realistic way. In a messy, complicated, this is going to blow up my entire life way. And maybe that's stupid. Maybe it's the worst decision I've ever made, but it's the first decision I've made in years that feels true. Ethan stood, closing the distance between them. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't want to ease back into my old life and hope we fit somewhere. I want to build a new life. With you, with Mia, with all the mess and complications that comes with it. That's a lot to ask. I know. Mia's not easy. She's 6 and she's grieving, and she has opinions about everything. I don't expect easy. And my house is a disaster, and I work crazy hours, and I can't give you anything close to what you're used to. I don't want what I'm used to. I want something real. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Charlotte could see him trying to find reasons to say no, to protect himself, to be sensible. Then she watched those reasons crumble. Okay, he said. Yeah? Yeah. We try, for real. Not the careful, realistic version. The messy, complicated, probably going to blow up version. Charlotte felt something in her chest unlock. I need to make some changes first. What kind of changes? The kind where I stop living a life that's killing me. She pulled out her phone, stared at it for a moment, then made a decision. I'm going to talk to my board, tell them I want to step back. Transition to a chairman role instead of CEO. Charlotte, that's huge. I know. And it's going to cause problems. But I built that company to give me freedom, not trap me. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that. She looked up at him. I want to be present for this, for us. I can't do that if I'm working 80-hour weeks and flying to Tokyo every other month. Are you sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Ethan pulled her into a kiss that tasted like salt air and new beginnings. When they broke apart, Charlotte felt lighter than she had in years. So what now? She asked. Now we finish this trip, and then we go home and figure out how to make this work. They spent their last full day on the road wandering through a redwood forest that made them feel impossibly small. Trees that had been alive for thousands of years, that had witnessed ice ages and extinctions and the entire span of human civilization, and were still standing. "Makes our problem seem pretty minor," Charlotte observed, craning her neck to see the top of a tree that disappeared into mist. "Or it makes them seem worth solving," Ethan countered. "We get maybe 80 years if we're lucky. Seems worth spending them on things that matter." "When did you become a philosopher?" "Probably around the time a billionaire climbed into my van and changed my entire life." They drove back toward home as the sun set, neither wanting to acknowledge what the next day would bring. The landscape reversed itself, coast to mountains, to desert, to scrubland, to the familiar suburbs they'd left behind. Around midnight, exhausted and running on fumes both literal and metaphorical, they pulled into a rest stop to sleep. Tomorrow they'd be home. Tomorrow they'd have to face reality. But tonight, they had the van and each other and the strange intimacy that came from knowing someone for less than 2 weeks and feeling like you'd known them forever. Charlotte woke first, before dawn, and lay in the darkness listening to Ethan breathe. Her phone showed 17 missed calls and 43 emails. Her old life, demanding attention. She powered it off and put it away. When Ethan woke, they didn't talk. Just held each other until the sun came up and the rest stop started filling with travelers beginning their own journeys. "Ready?" Ethan asked. "No." "Me neither." They got back on the road. The final stretch of highway felt like it was actively fighting them. Traffic jams, construction delays, a wrong exit that cost them an hour. The van overheated one last time, just an hour from home, and they had to pull over and wait for the engine to cool. "Even the van doesn't want this to end," Charlotte said. "The van's a piece of junk that's held together by miracles." "Our piece of junk." Ethan smiled despite himself. "Yeah, our piece of junk." They limped the final miles home, the van making concerning noises that Ethan chose to ignore. The familiar streets of Riverside Terrace appeared like a dream, or a nightmare. Charlotte couldn't decide which. Everything looked exactly the same. Their houses standing across from each other like they'd always been there. Like the past 2 weeks hadn't changed the entire world. Ethan pulled into his driveway and killed the engine. It died with a rattling cough that sounded final. They sat in silence. "Well," Ethan said, "we're home." "Yeah." Neither moved to get out. Charlotte stared at her mansion across the street. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the afternoon sun. Perfectly manicured lawn. The life she'd left behind waiting patiently for her return. "I don't want to go back in there," she said quietly. "Then don't. It's not that simple." "Isn't it?" Ethan turned to face her. "You said you wanted to build a new life. This is where that starts." Before Charlotte could respond, the front door of Ethan's house burst open and a small tornado in the shape of a 6-year-old came running out. "Daddy!" Mia launched herself at Ethan the second he got out of the van. He caught her, swinging her up in a hug that made Charlotte's chest ache with the sweetness of it. "Hey, baby girl, did you miss me?" "So much. Mrs. Patterson let me plant flowers and I made you a picture and I found a really cool rock." Mia pulled back, noticed Charlotte for the first time. "Hi, are you Daddy's friend?" Charlotte climbed out of the van. "Yeah, I'm Charlotte." "I'm Mia. I'm 6. Do you like dinosaurs?" Yes?" "Good. The Stegosaurus is the best one, even though people think it's the T-Rex, but they're wrong because the Stegosaurus has better defense mechanisms." Ethan laughed. "Mia, give her a second to breathe." Mrs. Patterson appeared on the porch, smiling. "Welcome back. How was the trip?" "Long," Ethan said, "and good. Thank you for watching her." "Any time. She's been an angel." Mrs. Patterson looked at Charlotte, then at Ethan, and something in her expression suggested she understood more than they'd said. "I'll leave you folks to settle in." She left. Mia continued chattering about her 2 weeks, barely pausing for breath. Ethan listened and responded and made all the appropriate dad noises, but Charlotte could see him glancing at her, checking to make sure she was okay with all this. She was more than okay. Watching him with his daughter, seeing this side of him that was purely focused and present and loving, made her more certain than ever that she'd made the right choice. Eventually, Mia ran inside to get the picture she'd made, leaving Charlotte and Ethan alone in the driveway. "She's wonderful," Charlotte said. She's a lot. Wonderful and a lot aren't mutually exclusive. Ethan looked at Charlotte's mansion, then back at her. You want to come in? Meet Mia properly? It's not fancy, but I'd love to. They walked toward his house together. Charlotte's phone started buzzing in her pocket. Her board, probably, or Jennifer, or someone else who wanted a piece of her time and attention. She ignored it. Ethan's house was exactly what she expected. Cluttered, lived in, full of the chaos that came from raising a 6-year-old alone. Pictures on the fridge, toys scattered across the living room, dishes in the sink. It was the opposite of her sterile penthouse in every way. It felt like home. Mia showed her the picture, a crayon drawing of what appeared to be a dinosaur eating a building. This is a T-Rex destroying the bad guy's house, she explained seriously. It's very good, Charlotte said, equally serious. You can have it if you want. Really? Yeah. You're Daddy's friend, so you're my friend too. Charlotte felt tears threaten and pushed them back. Thank you. I'll treasure it. She stayed for dinner, mac and cheese from a box and chicken nuggets shaped like dinosaurs. The conversation was chaotic, with Mia dominating most of it, but Charlotte didn't mind. This was real. This was what life looked like outside of boardrooms and quarterly projections. After dinner, after Mia's bath and bedtime routine, Charlotte and Ethan finally had a moment alone in the kitchen. So, Ethan said, you survived meeting my daughter. She's incredible. You don't have to say that. I'm not just saying it. She's smart and funny and so completely herself. Charlotte paused. I can see Sarah in her. Yeah, me too. Ethan looked toward the stairs where Mia had disappeared to her room. You sure about this? About us? Because it's not going to be easy. Mia needs stability, routine. I can't just drop everything for spontaneous trips anymore. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking if there's room in your life for me. Not as the center of it, but as part of it. There's room. He pulled her close. There's definitely room. They stood in his small kitchen, holding each other, while upstairs a 6-year-old girl hopefully slept, and across the street a mansion stood empty, waiting. I need to go deal with my life, Charlotte said eventually. Make some calls, start the process of stepping back. You're really doing it? I'm really doing it. She pulled back to look at him. It's going to be messy. There will be articles and speculation, and probably some people who think I've lost my mind. Have you? Probably, but in the best possible way. Charlotte walked across the street to her mansion. The door beeped when she unlocked it, security system confirming her identity. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it, clean, organized, empty. She powered on her phone. It immediately exploded with notifications. She ignored most of them and called Jennifer. Oh my God, Charlotte, where have you been? The board is losing their minds and there are reporters calling and, Jen, breathe. Don't tell me to breathe. I've been covering for you for 2 weeks and I'm running out of excuses. You don't need excuses anymore. I'm back. Charlotte walked to her floor-to-ceiling windows and looked across at Ethan's house. She could see him through his kitchen window, cleaning up dinner dishes. Schedule a board meeting, tomorrow if possible. What are you going to tell them? The truth, that I'm stepping down as CEO. Silence on the other end. Then, you're serious. Completely. Charlotte, you built this company. You can't just walk away. I'm not walking away. I'm changing my role. I'll stay on as chairman, provide strategic direction. But day-to-day operations? That's someone else's job now. The board is going to fight you on this. Let them try. Charlotte spent the rest of the evening making calls, sending emails, laying the groundwork for what was probably going to be the most controversial decision of her career. Some people understood. Most didn't. She didn't particularly care. Around midnight, there was a knock on her door. Ethan stood on her porch holding 2 beers. Thought you might need this, he said. They sat on her porch steps, the same porch where this had all started with a half-joking invitation and a decision that changed everything. I have a board meeting tomorrow, Charlotte said. It's going to be brutal. You want moral support? From the man I ran away with? That'll go over well. Fair point. Ethan took a sip of beer. You nervous? Terrified, but also more sure about this than I've been about anything in years. They sat in comfortable silence, drinking their beers, watching the neighborhood sleep around them. So what now? Ethan asked. Now we figure it out, day by day. You have Mia and work. I have whatever version of my company I'm about to create, and we find time for us somewhere in the middle. That doesn't sound romantic. No, it sounds real. Charlotte leaned against him. I'm done with romantic fantasies. I want the messy, complicated, real thing. Even if it's hard? Especially if it's hard, because the hard things are the ones worth fighting for. The next morning, Charlotte walked into her video conference looking like the CEO version of herself. Hair perfect, makeup flawless, wearing a power suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. But underneath, she was different. And when the board started their predictable arguments about her decision, she didn't back down. I've given this company 10 years, she said calmly. 10 years of 80-hour weeks and sacrificed relationships and personal time. I'll never get back. The company is successful. It's stable. It doesn't need me micromanaging every decision. The shareholders expect... Margaret started. The shareholders expect growth and profits, which the company will continue to deliver under new leadership. My stepping back doesn't change our fundamentals. Richard leaned forward. Charlotte, is this about the media speculation? Because we can manage that. This has nothing to do with media speculation. This is about me choosing to have a life outside this company. And what life is that exactly? Margaret asked, her tone suggesting she already knew and didn't approve. Charlotte smiled. That's none of your business. The meeting went on for another hour. There were arguments, negotiations, threats veiled as concerns. But Charlotte held firm. By the end, she'd gotten what she wanted: transition to chairman, the board's reluctant agreement, and a timeline for finding and training her replacement. When she logged off, she felt exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. Her phone rang. Ethan, how'd it go? He asked. I'm officially transitioning out. I have 6 months to find a replacement and hand over control. How do you feel? Like I just jumped off a cliff. That's kind of our thing, isn't it? Charlotte laughed. Yeah, I guess it is. 6 months turned out to be both too long and not long enough. Charlotte threw herself into the transition with the same intensity she'd built the company with. She found a replacement, her COO, who'd been ready for years. She restructured her role. She set boundaries she'd never had before. And in between the meetings and negotiations and the endless details of stepping back, she built a life with Ethan. It wasn't smooth. Mia had questions about why Charlotte was around so much. The neighborhood had opinions about the billionaire dating the mechanic. Charlotte's social circle couldn't understand why she'd give up her career for a relationship. None of it mattered. They had dinner together most nights, sometimes at Ethan's house with Mia chattering about dinosaurs, sometimes at Charlotte's penthouse, which slowly became less sterile as Ethan's tools and Mia's toys infiltrated the space. They argued about stupid things, whose turn it was to do dishes, whether 6-year-olds should be allowed to watch PG-13 movies, how to split expenses when one person was a billionaire and the other wasn't. They figured it out. Charlotte learned how to braid hair and make dinosaur-shaped pancakes. Ethan learned how to navigate charity galas without feeling like an imposter. Mia learned that having another person who loved her wasn't replacing her mother. It was just adding to the family. It was messy and complicated and nothing like what Charlotte's old life had looked like. It was perfect. 1 year after that first morning in the driveway, Charlotte stood in Ethan's garage watching him work on the van. They'd kept it, despite multiple breakdowns and the fact that it probably wasn't safe. Ethan was determined to get it running properly. You know, we could just buy a new vehicle, Charlotte said. This one has character. This one is a death trap. Same thing. Ethan emerged from under the hood, grease-stained and grinning. Besides, this van changed our lives. Can't just abandon it now. Charlotte walked over, careful to avoid the oil spots on the concrete. You're sentimental about a van. I'm sentimental about what the van represents. Which is taking chances, saying yes to crazy things, believing that sometimes the best plan is no plan at all. He pulled her close despite the grease on his hands. You regretting climbing into this thing? Not for a second. From inside the house, they could hear Mia practicing piano, badly, but with enthusiasm. Charlotte had bought the piano over Ethan's protests. Mia had lasted 2 weeks before declaring piano boring and switching to wanting guitar lessons instead. The piano sat mostly unused, but occasionally Mia would hammer out something that might eventually become music. She's getting better, Charlotte lied. She's really not. They stood in the garage that smelled like motor oil and old tools, holding each other, listening to a 6-year-old massacre chopsticks on an expensive piano. Outside, the neighborhood went about its business. Charlotte's company continued to thrive without her constant attention. The world kept turning. And Charlotte Bennett, who'd spent a decade chasing success and found only emptiness, had finally discovered what it felt like to be full. It wasn't the money or the power or the recognition. It was standing in a messy garage with a man who loved her and a child who was learning to, while an old van that probably wouldn't start sat waiting for the next adventure. It was choosing the complicated, imperfect, real thing over the polished version that looked good from the outside but felt hollow from within. It was understanding that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was say yes to something terrifying simply because it made you feel alive. The van would break down again. Life would throw obstacles at them. Nothing was guaranteed to work out perfectly, but they'd figure it out, together. One messy, beautiful, impossible day at a time, and that was more than enough. They drove in silence for the next hour, the weight of unspoken decisions filling the van like a third passenger neither wanted to acknowledge. Charlotte kept her eyes on the landscape rolling past, endless fields giving way to pine forests, then back to scrubland, the same cycle repeating like the world couldn't make up its mind what it wanted to be. Her phone buzzed. She ignored it, buzzed again. "You gonna get that?" Ethan asked. "No." "Charlotte, I don't want to talk to them, any of them." She turned the phone face down in her lap. "For just a few more days, I want to be nobody. Not a CEO, not a board member's problem, just me." Ethan glanced at her, then back at the road. "You know it doesn't work that way." "Why not?" "Because running away doesn't solve anything. It just delays the inevitable." Charlotte felt anger spike. "Is that what you think this is? Running away? Isn't it?" "No. It's..." She stopped, trying to find words that didn't sound offensive. "It's trying to find something I lost. Something I didn't even know was missing until I climbed into this van." "And did you find it?" "Yeah, I found you." Ethan's hands tightened on the wheel. "What if I'm not enough? What if you go back and realize this whole thing was just escapism? A billionaire playing poor for 2 weeks before returning to her real life?" The accusation hit like a slap. "You think that's what this is to me?" "I don't know what to think. You've got a company, responsibilities, a whole world waiting for you. And I've got a kid, a mortgage, and a van that barely runs. How do those things coexist?" "We make them coexist." "How, Charlotte? How exactly does that work?" His voice rose slightly. "You come visit on weekends? Slum it with the mechanic when you're bored with boardrooms? What happens when the novelty wears off?" Charlotte stared at him, feeling something crack in her chest. "Is that really what you think of me?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer. "No, but I'm scared. And when I'm scared, I say stupid things." "What are you scared of?" "That you'll realize I can't give you anything close to what you already have. That this ends the second we cross back into our neighborhood. That I'm going to fall completely in love with you and then watch you disappear back into a life I can't be part of." "You already are." "What?" "Completely in love with me. You already are. I can see it every time you look at me." Charlotte turned in her seat to face him. "And I'm already completely in love with you. So we're both terrified and there's no going back from this. The question is what we do next." Ethan pulled the van over to the shoulder, sudden, abrupt, and killed the engine. They were on an empty stretch of highway with nothing around them but sagebrush and sky. He turned to her. "I don't know what we do next," he said. "I've never done anything like this before. Sarah and I grew up together. We were high school sweethearts. It was easy because our lives already fit. But you and me, we're from different worlds. So we build a new world, one that fits both of us." "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple. It's probably going to be the hardest thing either of us has ever done." Charlotte reached for his hand. "But the alternative is walking away from this, and I'm not willing to do that. Are you?" Ethan looked at their joined hands. "No." "Then we figure it out, one step at a time." "Starting with what?" "Starting with finishing this trip. We have 4 days left. Let's not waste them being scared of what comes after." Ethan studied her face, and Charlotte watched the fear in his expression shift into something that looked like hope. Okay. Yeah? Yeah. 4 more days of not thinking about reality. Deal. They got back on the road. The tension that had been suffocating them for the last hour loosened slightly, though it didn't disappear completely. Charlotte knew they were just postponing the inevitable conversation, but she didn't care. 4 more days felt like a gift. Around sunset, they reached the coast. The ocean appeared suddenly after miles of nothing, a vast expanse of blue that stretched to the horizon and beyond. Ethan pulled into a beachside parking lot, and they both got out, drawn toward the water like it was magnetic. Charlotte had seen the ocean dozens of times, but never like this. Never with sand in her shoes and wind tangling her hair and the smell of salt so strong it felt like breathing something alive. "I've never seen the ocean before," Ethan said quietly. "Never?" "Never. We couldn't afford family vacations when I was a kid, and after Sarah got sick," he trailed off. "Never had a reason to come." They walked down to where the waves were crashing, neither speaking, just watching the water do what it had done for millions of years before them and would keep doing long after. There was something humbling about it, something that made Charlotte's board meetings and quarterly projections feel absurdly small. "You want to know something?" Charlotte said. "I've been to Paris, London, Tokyo, Singapore. I've stayed in hotels that cost $5,000 a night and eaten at restaurants where you need a reservation 6 months in advance. And I've never felt as present as I do right now, standing on a beach in the middle of nowhere with you." Ethan took her hand. "That's because you were performing in all those places. Here, you're just existing." "Is that enough? Just existing?" "It's everything." They stayed on the beach until the sun sank into the ocean and turned the sky impossible shades of orange and pink. Then they found a campground perched on cliffs overlooking the water and set up camp one more time. Dinner was canned soup heated over the camp stove and crackers that had gone soft from humidity. They ate sitting on a picnic bench, watching stars appear one by one over the dark ocean. 3 days left," Charlotte said. "Don't. We have to talk about it eventually." "I know, just not tonight." So they didn't talk about it. Instead, they climbed into the van and Charlotte tried to memorize every detail. The way Ethan's hands felt on her skin, the sound of his breathing, the exact weight of his body against hers, the way the ocean sounded through the thin metal walls. She was building a library of memories to carry forward, whatever came next. The next morning, they woke to fog so thick they couldn't see the ocean they knew was right there. It felt like being inside a cloud. Everything was muted, soft, unreal. Charlotte's phone had 3 voicemails from Jennifer. She listened to the first one while Ethan made coffee. "Charlotte, the board scheduled an emergency meeting for when you get back. They're not happy. And Margaret's been talking to shareholders. Please call me." She deleted all 3 without listening to the others. "Problem?" Ethan asked, handing her coffee. "Always." Charlotte wrapped both hands around the mug. "The board wants a meeting. They think I've lost my mind." "Have you?" "Probably, but I don't care anymore." They spent the day exploring the coast, finding tide pools full of creatures that existed in worlds completely separate from boardrooms and stock prices. Charlotte crouched next to a pool, watching a sea star move with painful slowness across a rock, and thought about how much energy she'd wasted on things that didn't matter. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked. "That I've been moving too fast my whole life, missing everything that actually matters because I was too focused on the next goal, the next milestone, the next achievement. And now? Now I want to slow down, actually see things, feel things." She looked up at him. "Be present for my own life instead of performing it for other people." That night, they found a roadside motel that had character, which was a polite way of saying it was falling apart, but in a charming way. The owner, an old woman named Ruth, who had to be pushing 80, gave them the key to room 12 and told them the ice machine was broken, but there was a mini-mart next door. The room had one bed with a headboard that was bolted to the wall and probably older than Charlotte. They didn't care. They ordered pizza from a place that took an hour to deliver and tasted like cardboard and nostalgia. 2 days left," Ethan said, picking pepperoni off his slice. Charlotte set down her pizza. "I don't want to count down anymore. We have to go back eventually." "I know. But when we do, I need you to know something." She shifted to face him fully. I'm not going back to my old life. I can't. That version of me was dying slowly, and I didn't even realize it until I stepped away. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm going to make changes. Real ones. I don't know exactly what they look like yet, but they're happening whether my board approves or not. Ethan was quiet for a moment. That's going to cost you. Probably. Power, influence, maybe some relationships, but I'll gain something more important. What's that? Myself. The version of me that exists when I'm not performing for shareholders and media and people who only care about what I can do for them. And you think you can actually do it? Walk away from all that? I don't think I have a choice anymore. It's either change or go back to being empty. Charlotte took his hand. And I'd rather have a messy, complicated life with you than a perfect, polished life alone. Ethan pulled her close, and they sat on the terrible bed in the rundown motel, eating mediocre pizza and talking about futures that terrified them both. But somewhere in that conversation, Charlotte felt the last piece of resistance crumble. She wasn't going back to who she'd been. That person was gone. The next day they drove without a destination, just following roads that looked interesting. They ended up at a diner in a town so small it didn't have a stoplight, eating breakfast at 2 in the afternoon while a jukebox played country songs from before either of them were born. Tell me about Mia, Charlotte said. Really tell me, not just the cute stories. Ethan set down his fork. She's grieving, still. 3 years later, and she still has nights where she cries for her mom. She asks questions I don't know how to answer. She gets angry sometimes, and I don't blame her because the world took her mother, and that's not fair. How do you handle it? Badly, most of the time. I make mistakes constantly. Say the wrong things. Don't know when to push and when to back off. He paused. But I show up, every day. Even when I'm exhausted and scared and have no idea what I'm doing, I show up. That's not badly, that's being human. She's going to have questions about you, about us, about why some stranger is suddenly in our lives. I know. And she might not like you at first. She might push back or test boundaries or... Ethan. Charlotte reached across the table. I'm not expecting this to be easy. I'm not naive enough to think I can just walk into your life and everything will be perfect. But I want to try. If you'll let me. What if you meet her and realize this is too much? That you don't actually want to be part of this messy, complicated family? What if I meet her and fall completely in love with her the way I fell in love with you? Charlotte countered. What if this becomes exactly what I've been missing? Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Okay. Yeah? Yeah. When we get back, you meet Mia, for real, not as the neighbor from across the street, as someone who matters to me. I'd like that. They finished their late breakfast and got back on the road. The miles were counting down whether they wanted them to or not. By evening, they were within 100 miles of home. Should we stop for the night? Charlotte asked. No, let's just finish it. Get back, face whatever's waiting. So they drove through the night, taking turns at the wheel, drinking terrible gas station coffee to stay awake, watching familiar landmarks appear like ghosts from their old lives. Around 2 in the morning, they crossed into their county. By 3, they were on streets Charlotte had driven 1,000 times without really seeing them. At 3:30 in the morning, Ethan pulled the van into his driveway. The engine died with a sound that suggested it might not start again without serious work. They sat in the dark cab, neither moving to get out. We're home, Ethan said. Yeah. Charlotte stared at her mansion across the street, every window dark, the security lights making everything look cold and unwelcoming. 2 weeks ago, she'd walked out that door as one person. She was coming back as someone completely different. I'm scared, she admitted. Me too. What if we can't make this work in the real world? Then we fail. But at least we'll fail trying. Ethan turned to face her. Charlotte, I love you. Not the CEO version or the billionaire version, just you. The person who fell in mud and complained about hot dogs and learned how to fix a camp stove. That's who I want. That's who I want to be. They sat in the van that had carried them across the country and back again, that had broken down and been fixed and broken down again, that had somehow held together long enough to get them here. And Charlotte made a decision. I'm not going back in there tonight, she said, gesturing at her mansion. Can I stay with you? Yeah, of course. They grabbed bags from the back and walked into Ethan's house. It was exactly as he'd left it, cluttered, lived in, full of evidence of Mia's existence. Pictures on the fridge, toys in corners, dishes in the sink. The opposite of Charlotte's sterile penthouse in every way. It felt like home. They collapsed into Ethan's bed, too exhausted to do anything but hold each other. Charlotte fell asleep breathing in the scent of him, feeling safer than she had in her own house in years. She woke to sunlight streaming through curtains and the sound of a key in the front door. Voices. Mrs. Patterson and someone smaller, younger, excited. Mia was home. Charlotte sat up, suddenly very aware that she was in Ethan's bed wearing his t-shirt and nothing else. Ethan woke beside her, heard the same sounds, and went pale. "That's not how I wanted you to meet her," he said. "Too late now." Footsteps on the stairs. Then a knock on the bedroom door. "Daddy, you home?" Ethan looked at Charlotte, mouthed, "I'm sorry," and called out, "Yeah, baby. Give me 1 minute." He threw on jeans and a shirt while Charlotte tried to make herself presentable. This was not how she'd imagined meeting his daughter. This was disaster. Ethan opened the door. Mia stood there in dinosaur pajamas, clutching a stuffed stegosaurus, staring up at her father with 6-year-old suspicion. "You were gone a long time," she said. "I know. I missed you. Mrs. Patterson said you went on an adventure." "I did." Mia's eyes drifted past Ethan to Charlotte, who was sitting on the bed trying to look like she had a perfectly good reason to be there. The little girl's expression went from curious to confused to something that looked like hurt. "Who's that?" "This is Charlotte. She's my friend. She lives across the street." "Why is she in your bed?" Ethan crouched down to Mia's level. "Can we talk about this downstairs? All 3 of us?" Mia's bottom lip trembled. "You got a new mom for me and didn't even ask." "No, baby, that's not—" But Mia was already running. They heard her feet on the stairs, heard a door slam somewhere in the house. Ethan dropped his head into his hands. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry." "Don't apologize. This is on me. I shouldn't have stayed." "Yes, you should have." He looked up at her. "This is just hard. It was always going to be hard." They went downstairs to find Mrs. Patterson looking concerned and Mia locked in her room. Charlotte stood awkwardly in the living room while Ethan knocked on his daughter's door. "Mia, please open up." "No, we need to talk about this." "You got a new mom and you didn't ask me." Mia's voice was thick with tears. "You said it was always going to be just us." Charlotte felt her heart break. This little girl had already lost her mother. And here was Charlotte, showing up in her father's bed like some interloper trying to take what little family she had left. "I should go," Charlotte said quietly. "Don't," Ethan said. Please, we need to work through this." "Ethan, she's hurting because of me." "She's hurting because her dad handled this badly." He turned back to the door. "Mia, Charlotte is not trying to be your mom. Nobody can replace your mom. But she is someone who's important to me. And I'd really like you to meet her properly." Silence from the other side of the door. "Please, baby, just come out and have breakfast with us. If you still want her to leave after that, she'll leave." More silence. Then quietly, "Dinosaur pancakes?" "Whatever shape you want." The door opened. Mia stood there, eyes red from crying, clutching her stegosaurus like a lifeline. She looked at Charlotte with an expression that was equal parts suspicious and curious. "You're the lady from across the street," she said. "With the big house?" "Yeah, that's me." "Why do you like my dad?" "He's old and he makes bad jokes." Despite everything, Charlotte almost laughed. "He's not that old, and I actually like his jokes." "That's weird." "Yeah, probably." They stood in an awkward triangle, Ethan looking exhausted, Mia looking defensive, Charlotte feeling completely out of her depth. Then Mia spoke again. "Can you make dinosaur pancakes?" "I've never tried, but I could learn." "They're hard. You have to make the legs skinny and the body fat." "Maybe you could teach me?" Mia considered this. "Okay, but if they're bad, you have to leave." "Deal." Mrs. Patterson, bless her, made herself scarce. The 3 of them moved to the kitchen where Charlotte discovered that making dinosaur-shaped pancakes was significantly harder than negotiating billion-dollar contracts. Her first attempt looked more like a blob with tumors. "That's terrible," Mia announced. "It really is," Charlotte agreed. "Try again." And listen this time when I tell you how to do it. For the next hour, Charlotte made pancakes under the critical supervision of a 6-year-old, while Ethan watched with an expression somewhere between terror and hope. Slowly, very slowly, the pancakes started looking less like crimes against nature and more like actual dinosaurs. "That one's better," Mia said grudgingly. "Still not as good as Daddy's, though." "Nothing's as good as Daddy's," Ethan said, ruffling her hair. They sat at the kitchen table eating slightly burnt dinosaur pancakes, and Charlotte felt the surreal nature of the moment wash over her. 2 weeks ago, she'd been a billionaire CEO with no personal life. Now she was sitting in a mechanic's kitchen being judged by his 6-year-old daughter on her pancake-making abilities. It was the best morning she'd had in years. "Can I ask you something?" Mia said suddenly. "Sure," Charlotte replied. "Are you going to live here now?" Charlotte glanced at Ethan. They hadn't discussed this. Hadn't discussed anything beyond making it through the next few hours. "I don't know," Charlotte said honestly. "Your dad and I are still figuring things out." "Do you want to live here?" "Mia," Ethan started. "I'm just asking." Mia turned back to Charlotte. "Do you?" Charlotte thought about her mansion across the street, the empty rooms and perfect furniture and the life that had slowly suffocated her. Then she looked around Ethan's cluttered kitchen with its pile of dishes and dinosaur drawings on the fridge and the evidence of real life everywhere. "Yeah," she said, "I think I do. Not right away. We'd need time to get to know each other first. But eventually, yeah." Mia absorbed this. "Okay, but I still get my own room, and you can't throw away my dinosaurs." "I wouldn't dream of it. And you have to keep making pancakes until they're good." "That seems fair." Mia took another bite, thinking. Then, "You can stay, for now. But if you make Daddy sad, I'll make you leave." "That's fair, too." The rest of the day passed in a blur of normal domestic chaos that Charlotte had never experienced before. Mia showed her every single dinosaur in her collection with extensive commentary on their names and abilities. Ethan tried and failed to fix the garbage disposal. They ordered pizza for dinner because nobody had energy to cook. Around 8, when Mia was in bed, Charlotte and Ethan finally had a moment alone on the back porch. "So," Ethan said, "you survived day 1. "Barely. Mia likes you. She threatened to make me leave if I hurt you." "That means she likes you. If she didn't care, she wouldn't bother threatening." Charlotte leaned against him. "I have to deal with my real life tomorrow. Make calls, face my board, figure out what my company looks like without me running it." "Scared?" "Terrified, but also more certain than I've ever been about anything." She looked up at him. "I meant what I said in the kitchen. I want this. You, Mia, this messy, complicated life. I want to figure out how to make it work. It's not going to be easy. Nothing worth having ever is." They sat on the porch while moths circled the light, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked. Charlotte thought about the board meeting she'd have tomorrow, about the inevitable pushback and criticism, and people telling her she was making a mistake. She didn't care. For the first time in her adult life, she was choosing something purely because it made her happy. Not because it made strategic sense or improved her market position or looked good to shareholders, just because it felt right. The next morning, Charlotte walked across the street to her mansion. It felt strange, like visiting a museum of someone else's life. She showered, changed into her CEO armor, power suit, perfect hair, the works, and set up for the video call that would change everything. The board appeared on her screen one by one. Richard looking concerned, Margaret looking hostile, the others somewhere in between. "Charlotte," Richard started, "we've been worried." "I'm fine. The media has been speculating. Let them speculate. I have an announcement." She didn't give them time to interrupt. "I'm stepping down as CEO. Effective immediately, I'll transition to chairman of the board. David will take over day-to-day operations." The silence was deafening. Then everyone started talking at once. Margaret's voice cut through the chaos. "You can't be serious. You built this company. You are this company. I built this company to create something meaningful. Somewhere along the way, it became a prison. I'm choosing freedom." "This is about that mechanic," Margaret said. "You're throwing away your career for a relationship. I'm reclaiming my life. There's a difference." Charlotte kept her voice calm. "The company will be fine. Better than fine. David is more than capable. And I'll still provide strategic oversight. but I'm done with 80-hour weeks and sacrificing every personal relationship for quarterly earnings. The shareholders will understand that a healthy, engaged chairman is better than a burned-out CEO who's going through the motions, or they won't understand. Either way, this is happening. The meeting went on for another 2 hours. There were threats and negotiations and attempts to convince her she was making a mistake. Charlotte held firm. By the end, she had what she wanted: a transition plan, the board's reluctant agreement, and her freedom. When she logged off, she felt lighter than she had in a decade. Her phone rang immediately. "Jennifer, please tell me you didn't just do what I think you did." "I did." "Charlotte." "Jen, I was dying. Slowly, quietly, but dying nonetheless. This is me choosing to live." There was a long pause. Then, "Okay, what do you need from me?" "Help me transition out gracefully, and then maybe help me figure out what comes next." "You don't have a plan?" "No. For once in my life, I have absolutely no plan, and it feels incredible." Charlotte spent the rest of the day fielding calls, sending emails, managing the chaos of her decision. But underneath the stress was a current of excitement she hadn't felt since the early days of building her company. She was free. That evening, she walked back across the street to Ethan's house. He opened the door before she could knock. "How'd it go?" "I quit, sort of. Stepped down as CEO. The board thinks I've lost my mind." "Have you?" "Probably, but I don't care." She walked into his arms. "I'm free, Ethan. Actually free for the first time since I was 22. "What are you going to do with all that freedom?" "I was thinking I'd learn to make proper dinosaur pancakes. Maybe help a certain 6-year-old with her homework. Spend time with a mechanic who drives a disaster of a van and makes me feel more alive than any boardroom ever did." Ethan pulled back to look at her. "You're really doing this." "I really am." "What about your mansion, your penthouse life?" "I'm selling it, or donating it. Haven't decided yet, but I'm done living in a museum of someone else's success." Charlotte smiled. "I was thinking maybe I could find a smaller place, something that feels like a home instead of a showpiece. Maybe near a certain house with terrible plumbing and a garage full of tools." "That sounds like a downgrade." "That sounds like everything I've been looking for." From upstairs, Mia called down. "Charlotte, are you staying for dinner?" Charlotte looked at Ethan. He nodded. "Yeah," she called back. "I'm staying." "Good. We're having dinosaur nuggets, and you have to eat at least 5. "That seems like a reasonable demand," Ethan laughed. "Welcome to my life. It's chaos." "I know. That's why I want it." They went upstairs where Mia had set the table, incorrectly, with forks on the wrong side and napkins folded into vague dinosaur shapes. Dinner was indeed dinosaur nuggets with questionable nutritional value and vegetables Mia refused to eat. It was perfect. Over the next months, Charlotte rebuilt her life from the ground up. She found a house 3 blocks from Ethan's. Small, old, with a porch and a yard, and absolutely no marble countertops. She learned to braid hair and pack school lunches and negotiate with a 6-year-old about bedtime. She messed up constantly, burned dinners and forgot important school events and said the wrong thing at the wrong time. But she showed up. Every single day, she showed up. Mia slowly warmed to her, testing boundaries and trust in the way kids do. There were arguments and tears and moments when Charlotte was certain she was doing everything wrong. But there were also moments of unexpected sweetness. Mia asking for help with homework, requesting Charlotte's terrible pancakes instead of Ethan's good ones, falling asleep on the couch with her head in Charlotte's lap during movie nights. The neighborhood gossip was inevitable. The billionaire and the mechanic. People had opinions. Charlotte didn't care. Her old social circle didn't understand. Most of those friendships faded quickly when Charlotte stopped being useful for networking and started just being herself. She didn't care about that either. The company thrived under new leadership. David sent her occasional updates, but mostly she stayed disconnected from the day-to-day operations. She consulted when asked, attended quarterly board meetings, and otherwise lived a life that had nothing to do with tech or logistics or supply chain management. She spent her days learning to be a person instead of a position, rediscovering hobbies she'd abandoned, making friends who didn't want anything from her, being present in her own life instead of performing it for others. And slowly, very slowly, she became part of Ethan and Mia's family. It wasn't smooth. There were arguments about merging lives and navigating grief and figuring out what their unconventional family looked like. Charlotte and Ethan fought about money and parenting and whose turn it was to deal with the school's constant emails. They figured it out. 1 year after that first morning in the driveway, Charlotte stood in Ethan's garage watching him work on the van. They'd kept it despite multiple breakdowns. Ethan insisted it had character. Charlotte insisted it was a death trap. They were both right. "You know, we could just buy a new vehicle," Charlotte said. "I have the money. This one means something. This one is held together with hope and duct tape." Same thing. Ethan emerged from under the hood, grease on his hands and a smile on his face. "Besides, this van changed our lives. Can't abandon it now." Sentimental about a van. Sentimental about taking chances. He pulled her close despite the grease. About saying yes to crazy things. About believing that sometimes the best plan is no plan at all. From inside the house, Mia was practicing piano, badly, enthusiastically, the same 3 measures of a song she'd been working on for weeks. Charlotte had bought the piano over Ethan's protests. It sat mostly unused except for these occasional outbursts of musical violence. "She's getting better," Charlotte lied. "She's really not." Should we tell her? And crush her dreams? Never. They stood in the garage that smelled like motor oil and old tools, holding each other, listening to a 7-year-old massacre, something that might eventually become music. Charlotte thought about her old life, the penthouse she'd sold, the CEO title she'd given up, the perfect, polished existence that had looked successful from the outside but felt empty from within. She didn't miss any of it. "You ever regret it?" Ethan asked, reading her mind. "Giving up everything?" "I didn't give up everything. I gave up nothing disguised as everything." Charlotte pulled back to look at him. "This is everything, you, Mia, terrible piano practice and burnt dinners and arguments about whose turn it is to take out the trash. This messy, imperfect, real life. That's everything. Even when it's hard?" Especially when it's hard. Because Charlotte had learned something crucial in that van, on those back roads, during those 2 weeks that changed her entire life. Success wasn't about accumulation of money or power or achievements. Success was about presence, about showing up for your own life instead of performing someone else's version of it. It was about choosing the thing that terrified you simply because it made you feel alive. The van would break down again. Mia would have hard days. Work would be stressful. Money would be tight sometimes, loose others. Nothing was guaranteed to work perfectly, but they'd figure it out. Together. One messy, beautiful, impossible day at a time. And standing in that garage with motor oil on her clothes and piano practice assaulting her ears, and the man she loved holding her close, Charlotte Bennett understood something she'd spent her whole life missing. Home wasn't a place. It wasn't a mansion or a penthouse or even a small house 3 blocks away. Home was choosing to show up, to be present, to build something real instead of performing something perfect. Home was this, and she was finally, completely, irrevocably home.